Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Audition Secrets: How to Prepare, Audition, and Book the Job with Aaron Marcus, our special host today, and his guest. And I'm going to let him introduce his guest today. But I want to introduce Aaron Marcus first. Aaron is America's premier acting and commercial modeling career coach. He's also a top-selling author and founder of HowToModel.com, one of Google's top-ranked acting and modeling career sites. Aaron Marcus has been a full-time actor and commercial model since 1986. To date, he has been cast in 1,182 times. He's been seen in projects such as Burn After Reading, Law and Order, Criminal Intent, The West Wing, Broadcast News, Crybaby, America's Most Wanted, Molson Beer, McDonald's, Kmart, A Modest Suggestion, and HBO's The Wire. Aaron Marcus has appeared in print ads throughout the United States, Europe, Netherlands, and Asia. And he's written what many consider the most important book for commercial modeling, entitled How to Become a Successful Commercial Model, now in its 5th edition. He also writes and publishes the Tear Sheet newsletter, a quarterly commercial modeling and acting newsletter. Aaron, welcome to today's workshop.
Hey, Joel, great to be here. So I just wanted to start off by introducing my guest, John Strawbridge, who some of you might know, and for those of you who don't know John, besides being just a really, really nice guy, he's also done many things in the industry. He's worked in casting, he's a director, he's a writer, he's done some acting, and I'm really, really so happy to have John with us today. So John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so what I want to do is start from the very, very beginning. And let's say an actor gets a phone call from an agent about an audition, or like in today's time period, we're finding out about auditions, online. What are some of the first things that you would recommend an actor to do as soon as they find out about an audition?
Well, you've got to. There's two things you got to be aware of. First, you got to be aware of the business things that you got to check out, and then the things that you as an actor need to know to start to prepare for your audition. So, just business, professional-wise, you got to make sure that you're getting information about when it's going to shoot. Make sure that you're available. Where it's going to shoot, make sure it's something that you can get to or don't have any problems with, and anything else that may matter to you. Whether it's a daytime shoot or a nighttime shoot, or inside or outside, or cold or hot, or those kinds of things. But then you need to start to look at the information you've got to have to prepare for your audition. So you've got to make sure whether it's information you're getting from your agent or manager or directly from the casting office. Anything you can find out about the project, who's producing it, who's directing it, where is it showing, is it a feature film, is it a television show, is it a series, is it a commercial, is it industrial? Because each of those facts, just the simple fact of whether it's a commercial or a TV show, is going to start your audition preparation and start asking the questions that you need to ask to understand what you're going to have to do next.
So, like for instance, if you find out who the director is, what would you do with that information? Besides possibly get very scared if it's a well-known director.
Well, no, hopefully you won't, because then you're in even better hands. But the first thing you want to do, and the first easy thing, is go online, go to IMDb or go to wherever online sources you have, and look up that director and look up the kinds of projects that he or she does. So you can begin to answer yourself, okay, is this director someone who's very improvisational in their style? Is it someone who's got a very bold, obvious in-your-face kind of style? Is it someone who's sort of more laid-back and artistic, or low-key? Whatever that director's style, that's your first step in preparing for that audition. So that you say, okay, I'm gonna start thinking about my performance in terms of what that person, the kind of work that person does. And the same thing is true of different networks have different styles, whether something's on Lifetime or it's on Spike or it's on HBO. That's going to give you a kind of a clue of the kind of programming they do.
And how would you describe some of the differences? I mean, certainly I'm not going to ask you to go through every single network, but maybe so people could hear very specifically if something is being produced or shown on HBO, how that would be different than on the Lifetime channel.
Well, that HBO, for instance, is going to be, they generally tend to be a bit edgier. They generally want a bit harder, a little bit more you might say more realistic, but certainly more adult take on what they're going to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean nudity or language, although it can, and you want to check that out if there's any question about what you're seeing in the sides. That's definitely going to be different on HBO than it's going to be on broadcast. Whereas something on Lifetime or for instance Hallmark is going to be a much softer edge. It's much more sort of family friendly, and that can appear in your performance in a number of different ways. But it's something that you have to take into account in picturing your finished performance in your head.
And so I know like in today's time period, and it works differently in different markets and for different projects, sometimes we are able to get the sides emailed to us ahead of time, or we go to a website and get the sides. And just to make sure everybody knows the terminology, the sides is the short portion of the script. I mean, typically, unless you're, pretty well-known actor, they're not going to send us the entire script for a film prior to the audition. So what they do is they will send the page or a couple of pages that has the lines that you're going to be auditioning with. So sometimes we can get the sides ahead of time prior to the audition. Sometimes we don't get the sides until we walk into the casting office. So let's just start off with, you get the sides at home. You've got a couple of days to prepare. I know that sometimes actors will say, it's so difficult to try to even figure out what I'm supposed to be doing here because we're only given a page or two and I have no idea what else is going on in the script. But I'd like to hear what you have to say about how you can really mine out and dig out some really very, very important things for your audition, even if you only have a page or two. So what kind of things do you actually look for when you're starting to go through the sides?
Yeah, well, and there's a lot. There's actually a ton of information you can get from 1 or 2 pages. But I actually want to back up a second because I want to address something that you referenced in there, and that's the very natural inclination of actors to get these 1 or 2 pages and start with, gee, how can I, or I can, it's so difficult with only 2 pages, or it's so difficult if I have to play the seated and it's supposed to be, there's all kinds of these things that actors automatically, naturally start to think, how can I? And the first thing you got to be aware about that is you can't. And there's a certain amount, you have to understand that in the audition process, when we're casting a show, first of all, everyone's under the same circumstances. No one else going into audition got more than you got. And we on the casting side, we know that you don't have the whole script, and we're not going to hold that against you. We're not going to say, gee, how could they not know that for the ending of this piece, that's not going to, we honestly totally get that you don't have the whole script. So you can just completely wipe that worry from your mind and say, if all I do is deal with what's in these 2 pages, that's all they're asking me to do for the purposes of the audition. If I get the job, then I can worry about the whole rest of the thing. So concentrate on the job you're given. To get to your question, what can you start to do with the sides? First of all, I've got a philosophy about what actors need to do, and it differs a lot from what people often hear in their acting classes. But coming from the standpoint of casting and knowing that as a casting director, it's not like I got a college degree in casting. I learned how to cast a role just by rolling up my sleeves and starting to have to cast network films and TV shows. So if an actor can look at the casting process from the casting director's standpoint and not from an actor's standpoint at first, and that sounds like a funny kind of thing to ask, but if you look at the process not in terms of, okay, what do I need, what can I do, how can I show off what kind of actor, and if instead you first take a step back and look at it from the standpoint of, okay, what do they need? What are they trying to accomplish in casting this role? That's going to give you a whole different perspective on how to look at the script, and it's going to be a much more useful perspective in terms of making the decisions that you've got to make, because then you're going to be asking yourself the same questions the casting director is asking. Because the casting director is not asking, well, how much can you do? The casting director is looking at these 2 pages saying, okay, what do I need? What do I need an actor to do with these lines? What do I need an actor to do with this scene? So you've got to ask yourself, you've got to create a process that's going to deliver what they're looking for, not what you can do.
And are there some specific things, like once you get the sides, like for instance, I've met some actors who, when they look at the sides, they immediately just highlight all of their lines and they look at the other person's lines and says, well, I don't need that because I'm not saying those lines. And all they do is just look at their own lines, and then that's how they go into an audition, which uh, it's not a method that I highly recommend. But maybe you can talk about some very specific things of what an actor should do once they get the sides, after coming up with the realization of, okay, so what does the casting director need in here?
Yeah, and you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, because, and again, it's perfect, and I don't want anything that I say to sound like, oh, silly actors, what are they thinking? I mean, everybody does this, everybody, until you can begin to get to that stage where you stop, where you can step back. Most actors are going to get those sides, they're going to open up, and they're going to go start breaking down their lines. It's a natural instinct, and it's actually almost the last thing that you want to do with the sides is start looking at the lines. And I always explain it like this, that if I'm a screenwriter, and I am a screenwriter, but when I'm writing a scene, I don't start with the lines and then work backwards to build a scene out of it. I start with, I've got my script, I've created a scene, and in this scene I need it to be revealed that that Joe is hiding a secret. So I think, okay, well, what can make that happen? And I lay out a circumstance that's going to make that work, and I figure what characters need to be in that scene, and what the relationship between those characters need to be, and what needs to happen plot-wise. And then the last thing that I'm going to do as a writer is put lines on that action. So to understand the scene and to perform the scene, you've got to go through that same process, where the lines are going to be the last stage of your preparation. So let me tell you the process that I like to go for. I like to start with work from the big picture down to the small picture being the line or the lines. So let me give you some specifics on that. You want to start with asking, and I always put this in terms of questions. That I say there's questions that you're asking of the script, but you're sort of asking them of yourself. So the first thing is what do I know about the project as a whole, right? The big picture side of it. What do I know about the project? What's the medium? Is it film? Is it television? Is it a commercial? Is it industrial? Because each of those different mediums is going to have a different set of expectations and tasks that you have to perform. Is it a comedic project? Is it a dramatic project? Is it mostly a character piece? Is it mostly an action piece? Because again, each of those is going to inform the kind of the general style of performance that you're going to go down. And then what we talked a little bit, what is the style of the project? That is, what is the, what do I know about the director or the network or the studio or the film series or the TV series that I'm going to be a part of? What are the kinds of stylistic things? And those are going to give you some very broad outlines of the kind of performance, but it's going to give you a much more clear picture. Because the problem is, I'm going to tangent here a little bit. The problem that you face as an actor, and it's a very real problem, is that there is no definitive right choice in how to do a scene. And I mean that literally, and that's coming from the perspective of the director and the casting director as well. It's not like, okay, here's choice A, B, C, and D, and C is right, and if they do A, B, or D, they're wrong, right? It's a question of being more or less effective. And there's a lot of realistic ways to play a scene. There's a lot of somewhat effective ways to play a scene. What you want to look for is a more effective way. So you got to eliminate from your mind the sense of right or wrong, the sense of trying to nail a scene, because it doesn't exist. That nail doesn't exist to hit on the head. So you're not looking at this in terms of getting it right, which is why I say this, having this broad picture of a kind of stylistic approach in terms of the mood and the tone and the pacing and the naturalism or the comedic or the how broad or subtle a piece is. Having that picture in your head to start with is vital, because I've certainly had people come in to audition. When we did casting for Wedding Crashers, people come in and be very serious and very deliberate in their delivery, and I eventually have to stop and say, this is a comedy. Like, is this a comedy? Yeah. And you might need to give me a slightly different tone in your delivery, so that we're not quite so broken up about that.
Which actually, and John, if I could just jump in for 1 second, because you mentioned something, so I guess that's another reason why it's just imperative that if you find out that it's a television show, you've got to watch the show. You've got to be very familiar with the characters, with the pacing of the show, who the characters are, because I would assume that if an actor comes in to read for a part, and they're asking you, hey, who is, this guy Jim, and you go, well, that's the star of the show. chances are you're not going to be taken all that seriously as
Yeah, I mean,
an actor.
it's a certain amount of just respect and a certain amount of showing us how serious you are as an employee, because frankly, we're not just hiring a talent, we're hiring an employee that we're also going to depend on. We may talk about this more later, but in the audition process, we're also looking to see, are you on time? Are you prepared? Are you professional? Are you personable? Do you get along? All the kinds of employer kinds of cues that we're looking for as well. And just having bothered to look up the show is one of those kinds of things. And not only are those things available on Netflix and Redbox and whatnot, but even if you go to IMDb, there's a lot of episodes of shows that you might not find elsewhere, but that you can't get the whole series, but you can get individual episodes just to get. A friend of mine in LA was recently auditioning for CSI Miami, and he'd never seen the show. I said that's fine, because I would rather not have seen the show myself. But if but I sent him the link. I said, it's here's the listing on IMDb. Here's an episode, but the show is all about style. The whole show is just style. So you really need to look at it. And I said, towards the end of the episode, there's an interrogation scene like the one you've been sent in the sides, and he had the sides in advance. I said, so take a look at the dynamic, the pace and the flow and the tone of this interrogation scene, so that you have it when you go into audition. And when I talked to him a little while later, I said, did you watch the episode? He said, yeah, I watched the first 10 minutes, but I just couldn't sit through the whole thing. I'm like, you couldn't devote 60 minutes to your job, to this kind of network opportunity? It's insane.
So after somebody has a really good sense of the style, they know what is going on there, what would be the next step for them to do when you're actually going through the sides?
Okay, so the next step, so once the broad step there was knowing about the project. The next step is to really begin to analyze the scene, and I don't mean the lines, but I mean the whole scene. And the first question that I always ask, and this is pretty important, is what is the purpose of the scene? And let me explain that a little bit, because people don't always cue into that. But it goes back to what I said a few moments ago about how a scene comes into being. That when a writer is sitting down to create the script, no scene is accidental. No scene just happens. He's not like walking along, it's like, oh my gosh, I have a scene in a cafeteria. How did that happen? Well, there it is, right? I mean, there's a very deliberate reason why the writer sat down and chose this. Okay, I need this scene at this time, at this point in the script. And so for you to create a performance that's going to give them, the director, the casting director, the producers, what they need, you have to know what that purpose is so that you're on the same page. And I can break that down into a few very specific types. General types. You need to be much more specific than this, but I'm going to give you some general types. And the first type is the scene may be plot oriented. Right? That scene is there to move the plot forward. It says the audience needs to see this happen, or the audience, it could be like what we call exposition, right? Where the audience needs to know what has happened in the past. Or maybe it's foreshadowing. The audience needs to get a sense of what's about to happen, if it's a suspense kind of thing. So in that case, you're going to concentrate on those plot elements of the scene and making sure that you're focused on moving the plot forward. The second type is a character scene. The scene may be focused on just some aspect of the character, some aspect of the character's relationships, and the plot is not going to be as important as understanding the emotions and the drives and the movements of what these characters, of who they are and what they're going through. And those two, for those of you taking notes, you can rest for a minute, because those are probably the only two you're going to encounter in an audition process. The other kinds of things, there are mood scenes. Again, in suspense or horror movies or romantic movies, there's scenes of dark shadows or waving fields of wheat or setting suns or whatever it is, which you're probably not going to have in an audition. Strictly action scenes, car chases, gunfights, sword fights, whatever it is, probably not going to have that in an audition.
And I guess as a suggestion, if that happens to take place at the audition, I assume that you would recommend that if there is a sword scene, that you wouldn't recommend an actor to walk in, with some kind of samurai sword and start swinging towards the reader or the casting director in the scene.
Please don't. I wish I could say that in my 18 years of casting that I had never been physically attacked, but I have been, because the action in the script called for it, and the actor thought, well, it's written down, I guess I'd better leap out of this chair and attack the casting director. Please don't do that, or please at least ask that question first. Now, when it says here strangles, Joe, do you want me to actually get up and strangle you? And I'll probably say, nah, let's just take that as read. So you're going to look at and when we get in, if we get in more detail or in a longer class, when I talk about the purpose of the scene, those general types exist, but for it to be useful for you in preparing your audition for this scene, you're going to need to translate that into something more specific. And I usually put that in terms of that it's got to be the purpose, and it sort of fill in the blank. The purpose of this scene is to show the audience that, and then fill in that blank. Because if you're not focused on what you're trying to show the audience, you've gotten it wrong. And that's one of the few times that I will put it in those absolute right or wrongs. Because if you're thinking, okay, the purpose of the scene is so that I can, you're already wrong. Because it's never, the purpose is never for you. The purpose is always for the audience. That's why we call it showbiz, because we're showing things. The purpose is always what we're trying to show the audience. So never think of it in terms of what I think of it in terms of what does the audience need
And
to
so
see.
would that mean, in like more specific terms, if it is a character-driven scene and we're trying to learn more about, let's say, the star or a major character in this particular project, I would assume that that would also mean that as you are reading your lines, you need to understand that the scene is not really about you and it's about somebody else, because it's that other person that we're trying to help the audience learn more about, which means you'd have to be very careful as the actor not to try to upstage things, not to try to draw attention to yourself.
For sure, and thank you for bringing that up, because that's actually one of my next points, is that the next question you've got to ask yourself, once you understand the purpose of the scene, is whose scene is it? And that's a surprisingly difficult question to answer for anyone, and we struggle with this. And because for some people, the very concept that the scene belongs to someone is new. But again, it relates to the purpose that the writer set down to either move a character's plot forward or move a character's aspect to the front. So any scene is going to be primarily some one character's scene. And unless you are already Tom Hanks or Julia Roberts, it's probably not yours. If it's a commercial or industrial kinds of film, it certainly may be. But you really need to make that determination and say, okay, when I answer that question, the purpose of this scene is to show the audience that, is it that I am doing something or that the other character is doing something? And if it's about the other character, if it's their story, if it's their emotional moment, if it's their character aspect, then you need to make this whole different set of decisions about how do I, as a supporting player, support the experience that the other character needs to go through to get artsy about it. But to put it in broad terms, how do we know Indiana Jones is brave? He's just standing there. Well, we know he's brave because everyone else is running away and looking frightened. Okay, and that's the difference between a lead and a supporting character, because Harrison Ford has the option and indeed the duty as the lead character to basically do nothing. And the supporting characters support that character by being the canvas, by showing that this is a scary situation or this is a frightening situation or this is whatever. That's how supporting characters work. They create the context that the main character doesn't fit into. So you really need to make that determination about, if it's not my scene, you probably have more work to do. You probably have a harder job to do in terms of creating the mood and the tone and the emotional context of that scene, so that the main character, whatever they're doing, stands out against that background. It can be a difficult question.
So then basically, so now you're in the next stage of trying to understand the sides. We still haven't even really gotten to, breaking down lines yet at this point. We're just kind of starting to look and see who's saying what, because, once again, I've heard you mention this as well. Quite often it's the other person's lines that tells you much more about your character than your lines do.
Right. So you want to look at, once you do start to look at the dialogue, you want to start to look at, as you indicated earlier, you got to look at both sets of lines, and you got to look at, and I always say, and I say this when I'm actually teaching just acting, not even at audition technique, that it's not the job of the actor to create a character. It's the job of the actor to create a relationship, and that's what any scene is about. That's what we look for in any movie or TV show. We're looking for what relationship comes out at this moment, and that's what you need to isolate in the scene. And I compare it to any of us in our lives are are a character. We're the star of our lives. And in some cases, when we're at work, we have one set of behaviors and attitudes. When we play that role of being the employee or the boss, or whatever we are at work, we go home to see our families at the holidays, and we take on a whole different set of behaviors. Because in each of those circumstances, at home or at work or with friends or out at the bar or at the beach, we're in a different role. And so the very same thing is true of your characters. There's a difference between character and role. And the character is the whole breadth and body of the life of the person that you're playing. But the role is this scene and this moment and how you relate to those other characters. So you absolutely have to be looking at that dialogue, as both of those lines. And how am I responding to the other person? Am I being quick to respond? Am I being slow to respond? Am I being belligerent? Am I listening? Am I even listening to that person who's leading the conversation? And just because, even if I'm leading the conversation, it still may not be my scene. Don't be confused by that. So yes, you've got to look at the whole of that dialogue and really just look at it as an audience. And I've seen actors, because I've done a lot of police shows and so it's fundamentally a whodunit kind of thing. And I've seen actors miss really obvious clues that would be clear to the audience because they're looking at it just from their role, and they don't take that first read to look at it as the audience and say, oh, okay, wow, this springs forward now. So yeah, your first pass of the dialogue is as the audience, and is looking at those relationships between the characters.
Now, so then for the next step, sometimes I've heard actors talk about, so they've gone through the process, they've read the lines, they feel like they know what should happen with this character, but they start thinking, you know what? But everybody who's auditioning is going to do it this way, because it just makes sense to do it this way. So I want to try to think of some other way of doing it so that I'll stand out more, so that it will be a little bit different. I mean, hopefully, it will still be true to what should be happening, but maybe, a different kind of take, just so I can do something a little bit different. Is that something that people should be thinking about, or should you not even have that concept run through your brain?
If you're aware of what other people are doing, then you're doing something wrong. Any choice that you make based on what other people are doing is likely to be a bad choice, because no two people are alike. And believe it or not, we do understand that in casting. I know how a lot of times you feel like cattle, and you feel like, oh, they've got 20 of us for the same role. But it's really not the case, and there's just enough differences in people's personalities and tones, whether you have any physical resemblance or not. And if you're making a decision based on either I want to do something different from what other people are doing, pardon me, or someone else is doing something great, and you say, okay, I want to do that, or maybe even a little better, because that sounds good to me, so I'm going to make that choice. In either of those cases, you're not answering that fundamental goal of serving the purpose of the scene. All your decisions, all your choices should be based on nothing else than satisfying the needs of that scene and achieving the purpose of that scene. Nothing else enters into your thought process. And I've used the word a couple of times now. I'm gonna reiterate choices, because I'm as a casting director, as a director, as a teacher, I'm huge on this idea that you need to make choices as an actor, and it's something that I fight all the time, because actors are constantly told, oh, it's about instinct, it's about gut, it's about just going with the moment, and that's wonderful, artistic, feel-good talk, but it's absolute crap as far as working in this business, because this is not a business about that. When you're working, and I want to say for network or feature films, but it's really even true if you're working for a no-budget independent, because they have even less time and resources to waste. Your job as an actor is to do a job, and that job involves making choices based on your experience and your preparation and your thought process, choices that you believe are going to work better than other choices. Because if you don't, because that's when the audition becomes overwhelming. That's when it feels like, gosh, I don't know what to do with this. There's 100 ways I could play the scene. Well, yeah, there are 100 ways that you can play the scene, and your instinct and your gut is really not going to it's going to narrow that 100 down to 50, but your choices are going to narrow those 50 down to one choice that you're going to feel confident about, because it was the result of choices, not the result of going with your gut.
Well, I know also sometimes people are so concerned about making what they would consider the wrong choice because they're not 100% sure, and they're thinking, well, what does the casting director really want here? So maybe I'll just kind of do it in a generic way so that at least I know I won't make the mistake of taking the character in the wrong direction, which certainly seems like a really poor decision to be making. Because and actually, I guess what I'd like to ask you is that, as a casting director, if an actor comes in and let's say, they go through this entire process, they make a decision, and let's say because they don't know what else is going on in this film or even, in the television show, their decision is way off base. But it's interesting. It's believable. It's just not the way it should be done for this particular scene. As a casting director, would you at least say, okay, well, the person didn't have all the details. I liked their attempt. It just doesn't work in this situation, but hopefully that will be enough to bring the person back for a callback, which we'll talk about later, and then we can give the actor a little bit more specific information.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because, and this is why I say, you need to have some sense of the process from the casting director's perspective. We are hiring talent, not psychics, and we do understand that, but for real, we understand that people don't have the whole script. They don't know what's in our mind. They don't know what's in the director's mind, and this you need to know from a casting insider. The director doesn't know. I mean, if he's good, the director doesn't know. A director who goes into a casting process with a hard and fast idea of exactly what type he wants in this role and what look and what performance is not a particularly good director, because there are all kinds of things to discover along the way, and you got to let the director make that discovery. So if you're going in to the audition with this idea of right and wrong, you're doing something that not even the director is doing. So so all we can look for on the casting side is to show that you have talent. And by talent, I mean that you can look at a script, you can make choices, and you can perform those choices, and that you can take some direction, which is a key thing that if we don't talk about later, I'm sure you have a question about that. But we're not the audition process. We're not setting out at the start of the day to find someone to nail the scene. We're setting out at the start of the day to find someone who shows promise, and that's all you got to do. Show us promise. Show us that you got something that makes us want to see more of you.
And I guess really, and you tell me whether you agree or have a different feeling about it, but it seems like forgetting talent, forgetting choices, it seems like the most important aspect to the audition is whether you physically look right for the part. Because I would tend to think that, unless you are, a star, which is a whole different kind of category, somebody who's going to be, guaranteeing a large audience. But, for the rest of us normal actors, if you physically aren't believable, chances are you're not going to land the part.
I was going to sort of not entirely agree with you until you put it a different way, because there aren't a lot of roles that that there has to be a certain that we have such a firm physical description. There are occasional roles where it says, this bodyguard is 6'4", bald and muscle bound, and then we're clearly. But what you said second was that this person is not right. And that sounds like a subtle distinction, but whereas there may be a range of people that work in the role, no one type, but there may be a range of types that work. Yeah, it's more of a problem if you're not in that range, if you're not right for the role. So so that's something that you don't have control over. You can't change that.
Well, I mean, like for instance, for me, the chances of me getting called in, whether they have specific, height, weight, descriptions, I'm not going to get cast as the head of a motorcycle gang.
Right. And you probably won't even get called in. I mean, that probably will not be a problem for you because you're probably not going to get that audition. Maybe you'll submit your headshot for it because you're feeling particularly bikery today. But shy of an absolute open call kind of situation. But the good news is that if you are called for an audition, if they bring you in, and you look at the script and the description is completely off, it's like, man, what? There are times when that's not a good call, but you have to assume that for the most part, and most of the time it's going to be true, that if they've called you in, then you can do the role. And maybe you don't know something about it. Maybe they have changed the description but not updated the script. Maybe the director has said, you know what, I hate the description of that character, toss that out, you show me some different kinds of types. Or maybe, and this happens a lot, maybe that's not really the role you're auditioning for. Because a lot of times when we're casting a project, I've got 60, 70 roles to cast, and I don't have time to break down 60 or 70 different audition sessions. So I'm going to put all of my, white males 35 to 45. I'm going to put one scene that is in that range. I'm going to all my females 18 to 20, all in that one scene. And then once I've got a sense, and I've had everybody read those few 5 or 6 sets of sides. Then I can say, well, this person, I was really interested in performance. She's clearly not right for this role, but on callback, let's have her read this role instead, or something like that. So to get back to my point, if you've been called in, if you've been given this audition, assume you are right for the role and play it as if you are right. At that point, do not worry about whether you think you physically fit the role.
So, like, for instance, if there was a film that I was brought in to read for, and it sounded like it was a very similar concept by the casting director, and this was a guy who owns a junkyard, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know that I really have that kind of look, and I was kind of hoping that perhaps they were just bringing people in because everybody was reading for the same part.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question that pops up is, well, do I read it as if I really am a junkyard owner, or because I know there was a part for a doctor in there, or do I try to play it for a role that I think is going to be more appropriate for me? And those are always really difficult decisions to make, as an actor, because you just don't know. What are your thoughts about something like that?
Well, the general thought is you got to go for it. Again, you got to assume that there's either something you don't know or some change that and maybe it's revealed later in the script that this guy only runs a junkyard because he used to be investment banker and he got burned out, and so he really needs to look like an investment banker But I would get back to my earlier point is that it's really easy to get caught up on, and I don't mean to dismiss it, but it's easy to get caught up on what I can do and what I look like and what I sound like. And you really, in that case, the case you described where you feel like you're really at odds with the description of the character, that's when you really go to the scene and say, okay, I'm going to base my decision on what the scene suggests needs to happen and what the characters need to get out of it, what the audience needs to perceive about this character. And my whole decision is going to be based on what I think the audience needs to see this character be and do. And that's why you go through this process, because that makes things, it may not be right. You may or may not get the point, but it's going to make the audition a lot more clear and comfortable. And whatever you do, you're going to go in and give a performance that you at least feel confident about, because you can say, look, I made these decisions and I feel confident in why I made those decisions. And you're going to give a performance that has a credibility and a confidence to it that's going to make them say, okay, he wasn't right for this role, but let's read him for another role. Or he's not right for this project, but let's keep this guy in mind because we've got another show coming in a month or two, and maybe we should bring him back for something more appropriate.
Well, speaking of being appropriate and looking right for the part, what are your thoughts about wardrobe? People are always asking, should I dress the part? Or I'm concerned I don't want to insult a casting director by going in to read for a doctor with a stethoscope and tongue depressors and booties on my feet. Do you find it helpful when actors do dress the part, or can you actually take it too far and have it hinder the audition?
Yes to all of the above. I wish I could give you a black and white answer to that, but unfortunately, like so many things in this business, it varies. There is no one answer, and that's why I always talk to actors in terms of questions and making the decision that's right for the circumstance. If you're doing, to generalize, if you're doing big budget stuff, network TV, feature film developments, generally you don't want to dress, you don't want to costume yourself because that will insult the director. And I mean, I even had one director say, well, not to me, but in the room with me, and say, I've won an Academy Award and I can't picture you as a fireman. You got to come in with a helmet. And he was genuinely pissed off at the actor that he wore a fireman's helmet. So in those kinds of circumstances, but to generalize, but if you're doing lower budget stuff, commercials, industrials, local production kinds of things, they tend to favor those things a bit more, and sometimes they often appreciate the effort that you've gone to. It can get hokey. I mean, if you do the full outfit, particularly knowing most auditions are going to look like you and I look here, head and shoulders, and all the stuff that you did from here down was pretty much a waste of time. So yeah, you don't want to look like, because the message you could send, obviously, is, I don't have any confidence in my performance, so I'm hoping the outfit sells me because that's all I got. So you don't never want to send that message. So I do have a rule, and it's kind of a double negative, but my rule is dress not inappropriately, right? So it means you're not going to try to costume yourself. You're not going to try to guess what this character should be, but you just don't want to be, you don't want to throw them off. If you're auditioning for a farmer, don't wear a suit and tie. Just wear something casual, right? If you're auditioning, and conversely, if you're auditioning for the maintenance worker, or if you're auditioning for the lawyer, don't wear your Budweiser T-shirt.
Well, you know what I do, and I find this helpful if I am going to read for a doctor, or whether it's a go-see for a print job or I'm auditioning, for a part, I will bring a lab coat with me, and I'll ask the casting director, "Hey, is it okay to put on a lab coat?" And
yeah,
the casting,
yeah.
so that way, the casting director can let me know. Although I did have one very unusual experience in New York when I did that, and the casting director said, "Well, no, you can't wear it." And I said, "Well, why?" I'm just kind of curious, how come? She said, "Well, nobody else has one." And I just thought, well, okay, well,
you can wear it if you leave it, let everybody else wear it as well.
Right.
But you and I want to take a little bit of a tangent, but you allude to an important point there, is that anything that you and I talk about, or anything that you kind of learn about in your career, 100% sure that you're going to come up against some audition or some circumstance that goes exactly the opposite. Because like any business, this business is filled with directors, with casting directors, with producers who are not making good decisions themselves, who are not doing their business as well as they should, or to put it more bluntly, are flat out wrong or incompetent. So, and a lot of people assume that whatever a casting director says, that's what I should do in my career from here on out. And that's not necessarily true. You got to keep your brain engaged, and you got to keep it, except for myself, of course, always. But you got to keep your brain engaged and say, okay, when I'm in your office and in your audition and your film, you're the boss. I'll do what you say, even though it doesn't make any sense, but it's your project. But I'm going to ask myself, when I'm outside your office, when I'm on another project, does that advice still make sense, or does that seem nuts? Because a lot of times it's nuts.
And that's so true, because, and I think it's helpful for people to hear this, a few times, there are very few absolutes in this business, and there are things that we're talking about today that are based on your experiences and my experiences, and it doesn't mean that it's the only way that things have to be done. And I mean, even like, for instance, because something I was going to ask you about that deals with memorization of the sides prior to an audition. And I've heard the complete diametrically opposed responses from different managers, where one will say, absolutely, if you have a day ahead of time before the audition, I expect all of my talent to have things memorized. And I've heard other people, this was a manager, not a casting director, manager say, absolutely not. I never want my talent to memorize things. I want them to be very familiar with the lines so that when they go in there, they will just blow them away, and they're going to realize they're not even off book yet. I mean, they're still, playing with the sides. Imagine what it's going to be like when it's actually, finalized. But I am curious to hear, when people are coming in to read for you, especially for, the first time, do you expect things memorized? Is that helpful when people have things memorized as far as you're concerned?
Well, let me say, first of all, to go back, because you asked earlier about questions you should ask your manager, and the simplest answer to that question is make that one of your questions. Say, whenever you get an audition, say, do you expect the sides to be memorized? Maybe you will or won't get a definitive answer to that, but it's their ball, play by their rules. What do I expect? Coming in my background, primarily, again, network TV, feature film, I don't expect people to have it memorized. I don't object to it being memorized, but again, I'll specify it when I do want it. But I have, by a vast majority, seen more auditions blown by trying to memorize it than I've seen auditions saved by being memorized. Because no matter how good that you think you are overnight or in 48 hours, there's a huge difference between someone acting and someone remembering, and I can see it. I can see it every time. I can see an actor remembering their lines and delivering them, maybe even with some passion, but I'm seeing you remember those lines versus give me a performance. I would much rather the understanding, the expectation, and I doubt many casting directors have sat down and written this out, but the expectation of the business is you're an actor, you can memorize lines. The purpose of an audition is not for you to demonstrate that you can memorize lines. That's given, that's assumed. The purpose of the audition is to say, can you perform? Can you look at a scene? Can you make some decisions? Can you carry out that performance? And that should be your focus. And if you can do that and memorize the sides in a very short period of time, okay. But if it comes, because a lot, and I get misquoted a lot, people say, oh, John always says don't memorize it. I'm not saying don't memorize. I'm saying if it comes to a choice between having that scene memorized and having that scene performed well, God's sakes, choose performed well.
You know, it's funny you mentioned. I was just at an audition last week, and I didn't see the sides until I walked in there. And typically, unless I can memorize things pretty quickly, the words are just flowing. I don't, because like you were saying, I'm more interested in having a really good performance than to show how quickly I can memorize some words. So I walked in, and even when I have things memorized, I still want the sides in my hand. Even if I'm convinced I can do this from memory, I still want that just in case I need it. And the casting director, which really shocked me, she said, well, why don't you just get rid of the sides? And I wanted to say to her, no, I don't want to get rid of the sides. So, and I really didn't. So I felt like I kind of had to make like a little bit of a joke there, and I just said, it's kind of like my blanket. I promise I won't suck my thumb, but I really like having. And she said, oh, okay, here we go. Somebody needs that little blanket. You need that comforting. I said, yeah, I really do. And as it turns out, I never used it.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be in the middle of an audition and all of a sudden go blank, and then say, whoops, can I start over? As opposed to taking a real quick glance at the sides and making it, a really good performance. So anyhow, I always like having the sides in my hand,
yeah.
even if I do, feel like I've got it memorized.
And I think that's a good idea, and but that's an interesting story to tell, because I can tell you what the casting director was thinking in that case, and she had been through the rest of that day of people sort of coming back and being dependent, and there's always this lag that people get when they're half memorized, where they're doing great with their lines, and then they're dead when they're getting a line back. They're getting no reaction, and then they're on their line and they're doing great, and then they're dead while they're listening. And since we're looking for the reaction, that halfway point of being half memorized and half not is deadly. But what she was saying, and when you hear that, it means we don't care about the script so much. We don't care if you get the words right. We don't care if you get the lines in the same order. We're really interested in your personality and what you bring to this role. And if you come to a point where you forget a line, don't even stop and say, let me start again. Just stay in character and let's see where you go, and we'll stop it if we want to. Because less often than you might think do we really care in the audition. On set, it's a different thing. But in the audition, we're not looking for you to be word perfect. We're not even looking for you to be line by line. Again, we're just looking to see what you're delivering on screen. And I've done that too. I've done it when I've seen actors dependent upon those sides to the detriment of their performance. I've said, put the sides down. Just go with whatever comes. I don't even care if you get the right lines. Just perform for me.
That's interesting. So maybe we can start, you can start walking people through the process of now they actually go to the casting office. And just to kind of jump in, if you don't have the sides ahead of time, I always like to get there at least a half hour prior to my audition. I don't sign in or anything, and I just grab the sides and then kind of hide a little bit and start working, and start going over things. But for people who haven't had many opportunities to walk into a casting office, well, what is there? I mean, what kind of things should they expect to be able to see, and what actually is the process of walking in, and do you sign up, or what happens?
Obviously there's going to be some variation, but what's typical is that, you're going to, and I want to reiterate what you said, please arrive early, if not just to study the sides, but having that moment to feel like, okay, I'm over the traffic, I'm over finding parking, I'm over walking up 6 flights of steps, that's going to do a tremendous amount for where you are in your performance. So you're gonna come in. There's gonna be some kind of sign in. Some offices take people in the order that you sign in, which is why you suggested that you might not want to sign in until you're ready with the sides. Some offices are gonna take people in appointment order, no matter when you got there. But whatever it is, you're gonna sign in. You're gonna get your sides, and at that point, it's a good time to expect something you didn't expect. The sides have changed. They've moved the office. They're moving up the auditions a half hour. They're moving them back a half hour. Your character's been cut, but here, read this character instead. Don't let that throw you at that point. It's really common that you're going to walk into that audition and have some kind of surprise. So just be prepared to roll with that. So you're going to get your sides. You're going to take that time. If you haven't had them already, yeah, you find some quiet place or some mental space where you can begin to work through the process, begin to ask yourself the questions about the sides, begin to understand the scene and understand the character. Where you can ignore your fellow actors in the waiting room, because there are, at different markets, that there are people that they've been there, they've studied their sides, and now their whole goal is to distract you. And they're going to talk about the weather and your kids and your vacation time and what a good job they thought you did on Law and Order last week, and take up your time. And that's not social time, that's work time. When you actually get called in for the audition, you're either going to read for a college intern who's holding the camera and knows nothing about the project you're auditioning for and can answer no questions for you, or you're going to walk in and there's going to be 6 people and 2 of them are on the phone and one's eating lunch, and it's ridiculously distracting. But in some variant, they're probably going to bring you in. They may give you a rehearsal, not always, but you may give you a chance to rehearse it, and that's a good.
Is it okay to ask?
Ask for a rehearsal? It's always fair to ask, which is not to say that there aren't some casting directors that will take offense and be angry because they're impatient that you asked, but I'm telling you here, it's fair to ask. Just be prepared that they might say, nope, we don't have time for that, we're going to go straight to camera. In which case, okay, well that means everybody that comes in today is going straight to camera. I'm no worse off than anybody else. So then we will, and this is one of those times when people discover that, even though you're seeing it, you're chasing down a suspect, you may need to be seated in that chair because that's where the camera is focused and that's where the light is pointed, and that's the only way we can record you for the audition. Again, same for everyone. Or they may have you stand in a spot. For commercial auditions, it's much more likely that they're going to have a wider shot and you're going to have to perform some kind of action. There may even be commercial auditions that there's no dialogue, it's just action. It's like, okay, you're driving a minivan and you're pulling up and now there's your son at the curb, you're happy to see him, good, let me see you happy, okay, good, now open the door, and that's kind of tough stuff to do as an actor, but that may be the case as well. But typically we'll put it on tape, thank you, and then you'll walk out and you're like, what just happened? I spent a week preparing and mentally gearing up for this audition, and in 5 minutes, and I'm out of there. How did that happen?
Typically, if it's going to be a film or a TV show, the actor will slate to the camera and give their name, or sometimes they will ask, who your agent is. Although in today's time, sometimes all that is already in the computer system, so you can always just ask. But quite often, I assume that for film and television, you're actually going to be reading to a reader, somebody who's reading the opposite lines to you and not towards the camera.
Yeah, and that's another good question to ask is, now do you want these lines to camera or do you want them to the reader? There's no right answer to that. They'll tell you how they prefer to do it. I prefer to do it to the reader because it's more natural. That's what it's going to look like on screen. But a lot of times the casting assistant or whoever they've got reading is uncomfortable with that, so they'll tell you to play the scene directly to the lens, which is unnatural, but hey, you're an actor, you can do that. You can pretend that lens is your best friend.
And when you were when you were talking about, let's say, a police thing, and you're holding your gun up and you're pointing it at somebody and screaming at them, do you want to see the actor actually, point their finger and hold their hand as if it's a gun, or do you say, that's ridiculous? Like, just read the lines to me. I know you'll be able to hold a gun when we actually cast you.
If it's something that's reasonably doable, and it probably help you, I wouldn't mind. I mean, if it's just pointing a gun, I mean, you don't need to do the little things, but I mean, if you just want to do the fist, that's fine. If it's something that's not reasonable to do either on your X or in your chair, then don't do it. Again, we're looking for the spirit of the thing. So, I mean, and I use an example in some of my classes where the character says, Sheila stands up in rage. Well, you can't stand up because you're going to be out of the camera. But you can still show me that reaction. You can still show me that moment when you're so outraged that you would. You know, you don't ignore that stage direction. You don't ignore that moment. You still give them the reaction that it was put in the script for.
Because what I hear that sometimes when people start holding imaginary props in the audition, that sometimes it gets very distracting, and the casting director or the director or whoever is watching your audition, all of a sudden they start wondering, well, where are they going to put that cell phone? Did they put the cell phone down that they were holding a second ago, and all of a sudden, you know, they stop watching the performance and they're starting to kind of evaluate the, you know, the physical parts of the read, which is certainly not in our best interest.
Yeah, it's the same, and the same thing applies to when you ask me about wardrobe or jewelry or hair. If I'm aware of it, it was probably a bad choice, or you overdid it or did too much. So yeah, I was. So again, it's sort of, yeah. If you're on the phone, you know, again, I don't even need the fingers. You just, you know, a mild gesture. But more than that, what's worse for me is people that try to use actual props, that they've pre-staged their cell phone or they've got a pad in their back pocket. Because first of all, I always see them like getting ready, you know, it's like they know that line's coming up and they're going to go for the cell phone, or that's when they fumble it and drop it. And using actual props is far worse than the imaginary props. But either, again, it really comes down to, you know, again, ask yourself the question, what are they looking for in this audition? Are they looking to prove that I can hold a phone? Are they looking to prove that I can hold a gun? Are they looking to prove that I can jump rope? No, really, in the audition process, you know, unless it's stated otherwise, all we're looking for is, are you conveying something? Are you communicating something on screen? Am I, as an audience, watching your audition on the monitor? Am I getting something? Am I understanding the scene? Do I know what's going on? And that's all that you got to focus on. Anything else is it's gravy at best.
You know, and when I was talking before about, you know, asking about wearing a lab coat, I'm also thinking that there are some other questions that I think, you know, would be appropriate, but I'd like to ask you about it as well. Like, for instance, if it is a film, and I'm reading with, you know, a character named Mary, and I have no idea who Mary is in this particular project. So, you know, that would be an appropriate question, wouldn't it, to be able to say to the casting director, hey, just wanted to find out what is my relationship with Mary?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about questions in general, because a lot of people are surprised to find that they can't answer questions like, is that allowed? It's like, it's not a game show. You know, it's not, yeah, it's allowed. And again, which is not to say that you won't occasionally get a rude reaction to it, but I'm telling you in general, yeah, it's allowed to help them cast their project. But I always say you will get an answer as specific as the question you ask. So first of all, don't go in with 20 questions. That's just not reasonable time-wise. You know, look at the script, come up with one or two, you know, intelligent questions, but helpful questions that you really need to know to play the scene. But ask the question you want, because if you ask, so what are you looking for in this scene? You're going to get, we're looking to see what you do with it. And you know, so if you ask a very general question, you're going to get a very general answer. But if the question you ask, you know, what's my relationship with Mary, might get a better response. You still have to be aware that the casting director may literally not be able to answer that question. I've gone into a number of projects where I simply had not sat down with the director before casting. The director's in LA. He's doing other things. He's location scout. He's whatever. And I've got the script and I got to start casting. So you ask me what the director's looking for. I don't want to answer because I might lead you in the wrong direction. So I'm going to give you that frustrating, well, let's see what you do with it, and then if you need any direction, you're going to be like, ugh. But I'm honestly trying to save you from my bad advice, because you've got everything I've got. I got the sides, you got the sides. You know, I may dodge the question because I don't have an answer for you.
Or you just might want to see what you're bringing, you know, the actor's bringing to the table, which might be really interesting and very different than what you've heard the director might even be looking for.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's why we have actors, right? I mean, we certainly want you to take direction and to do what the scene needs, but we're definitely looking in actors, we're looking for partners. We're looking for creative partners. We're not looking for subordinates. And I know that's intimidating if you're auditioning for, as you say, you know, a big name director or a major co-star, but especially if it's a big name director or a big star co-star, they're looking for support, not a fan.
You know, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, and I'm glad that I followed my intuition, but I was once reading with another actor in a scene, And it was very clear at the very beginning, this actor had really only done theater. And we're having a very quiet conversation. We're sitting at a table, and during the audition, this actor is still trying to belt things out so people in the back row could hear us. And as an actor, I'm not going to, tap the guy on the shoulder and say, "Hey, excuse me, I'm really like 3 inches from your face. You really don't have to scream at me here." And once we were done with the audition, meanwhile, I'm thinking, "Oh, that was just horrible," because they're trying to, find a good relationship with these people. It just was not very good. So as soon as the actor walked out of the room, I had like this little urge to run over to the casting director and say, "Hey, can I possibly read this with somebody else?" And I decided not to, because I was thinking, you know what, I'm hoping that the casting director could at least see what I brought to the table, even though I didn't want to follow this other actor. I didn't want to start, shouting back at him.
Right.
And I was just hoping that they liked enough of what I brought so that if they, do have callbacks, then they'd have me read with somebody else. But have you ever experienced anything like that where an actor asked if they could read it again with somebody else?
Oh, all the time. Actors are forever asking to do it another way or do it a better way.
With somebody else, you mean?
Well, let me say that I don't get, because I don't do that. Because as a casting director, I really object to auditioning actors together for exactly that reason. You can take a perfectly good actor, completely ruin his chances by pairing him up with somebody who doesn't work. So I think it's a really bad way to do an audition. I always have.
That's unusual. That's an unusual philosophy.
Well, it's unusual in the local market. It's not unusual in network and feature film, but it's often unusual in the local market because it's a time saver. And that's the one time, and it's the only time as an actor that I will tell you to ignore your scene partner, is during an audition. In an audition, you've got to really be focused on delivering the tone and the level of the performance that you've chosen, right? That you think is appropriate given what you know about the piece, and not let the other person's harmony throw you off. Now, as far as asking, can I read it with somebody else? Can I read another role? You know what? You called me in for the junk, but I see that you're auditioning a lot of doctors, and I really do good with doctors. I play a lot of doctors. Can I read that role instead? Almost any variant of that question. What the casting director hears is, "Hi, I think you don't really know what you're doing, and I think I've got a better sense of how to do this casting session, so can I do it my way?" It's never going to be received well. And I wish every audition you had was going to be in the perfect world and was going to be your best opportunity. Welcome to business. In the business world, and this is a business, yeah, you're going to have some auditions where you just didn't get the best shot you're going to have, but you got to be in it for the long game, and you got to keep that relationship with the casting director and make sure that you're representing your agency or manager as someone who is cooperative and who is easy to work with. So as much as possible, resist that question.
So I guess that would be, one of the list of things to never do when you're auditioning, of basically telling the casting director you have no idea what you're doing, so let me read for something else.
Right.
You got something else for me? And I guess
actors, I was going to say, and along that list is don't rewrite the script. Don't go in and do a funnier version of the scene that that they wish they'd written.
Because you certainly know much better than the writers on this film of how to go about putting together a scene. And I guess kind of speaking, about the audition, and it being a business. Look, there are days where, at least I can speak for myself, I walk out of an audition and I feel like, I did exactly what I wanted to do. It felt right to me, and I realize that quite often there's very little correlation between that and booking or not booking the job. And there are days I walk out and I go, it really wasn't very good. And that could happen for a variety of reasons, whether an actor is distracted, whether they are, they came in late, they didn't prep properly, they parked at an illegal spot and they're worried about getting towed, or, who knows, maybe they're feeling pressure because they need this job. And you did a horrible job. Any suggestions on how do you deal with that? I mean, do you say something to the casting director and say, "Hey, look, I know today wasn't very good. Don't judge me on this one," or what are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is, please God, don't do that. Don't. And again, I've had it. I've had actors say to me all the time, it's like, oh, before I go, I just want to let you know my kid is sick. I haven't gotten any sleep last night. I broke an ankle and it's distracting me. And if you bring me in for a callback, I'll do better. And at best, at its absolute best, what the casting director hears is, hi, I'm not completely in control of my performance. I might be better tomorrow, or I might be worse. You don't know. But give me another shot. And that's not the message you want. You don't want to send the message that you are not the one in control of your performance, that anything could throw you at any time. So don't say that. Don't ask to reread it. Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't, it's like, it's better that they make the decision. It's like, wow, Aaron's usually really strong. He was a little off today. I wonder if something's on his mind. Well, yeah. But I mean, as far as how you deal with it personally, deal with it. No, and you'll as you do this business enough, you're going to have enough experiences where you walk out of an audition thinking, oh God, I can't believe I blew that, and then you get a call back. And I've had actors, when I give them the call back, say, really? I thought I did terrible. Like, well, thank you for your opinion, but we thought you did okay. Maybe we were wrong. And you've had times that you were sure that this is one of your best auditions ever, and you never get a call back. You're never going to understand that, because there's so much that goes into the process. Once the audition is done, there's so much of it that has little to do with your performance. Ideally, we're going to have, if we have 10 actors audition, 6 of them are going to be really good choices for the role, but a couple of them are going to be, too tall or too short for the person they're playing opposite, or just the wrong kind of type. One of them might remind the director of his third-grade teacher, and he really hated his third-grade teacher, and so you're not going to get the call back regardless. And I've had directors say, look on a couple occasions, these words in particular, look at a brunette actress, say, well, I really like her, or look at a blonde actress and say, well, I really like her, but I've got too many blondes in the cast already, and I need the audience. And that sounds like, oh gosh, what do you do? We're doing Baywatch. But I mean, it's reality that one of the jobs the director has is to make sure the audience knows who each of the characters are and can tell them apart at a glance. And if he ends up with too many characters in supporting roles that kind of look alike, his audience is going to get confused, and so he has an obligation to make sure people look different, and see, that may be his decision.
But see, I hear that kind of stuff, and I know that it happens, and it's one of the things that kind of makes me crazy in the industry when I think, people do dye their hair. If you really like this actor's performance, change their hair color. It's not that. Yeah. We're not talking about plastic surgery here.
And I know why that drives you crazy, and it can, but the cold hard reality, and I'm assuming that everyone watching came in today for some cold hard reality, is like, yeah, you with dark hair might be exactly right, but 2 people after you who auditioned is you with dark hair, is somebody else who gave your same performance but has the dark hair. So why am I going to deny him a job? Because remember, every time I give you a job, I'm denying somebody else a job. So why am I going to deny him a job when he's already got the dark hair so that I can bring you in and dye your hair? And I know that's frustrating from an actor standpoint, and then, oh gosh, I could have done that Monday morning quarterbacking. But nobody's going to be surprised to hear that it's a very competitive business, that there's a ton of people auditioning for very few roles, and chances are we already have that person, that physical type, without having to alter you to look like it.
And just to kind of, because I know we're going to be winding things up pretty soon, but I guess what I do at the end of a performance, no matter, or when I say performance, the audition, no matter how I'm feeling internally, whether I felt like, that just was not very good, or I thought it was, no matter what, I just walk out of there like I just gave the greatest performance of my life, and just thank the casting director, hey, thank you very much, and walk out. And so that way I feel like, even though I didn't think it was all that great, well, maybe they liked it. And that way I'm not casting any kind of negative feel about it. And if they didn't like it, and I still walk out with a lot of confidence, maybe it will, change them a little bit, and maybe they'll view it a little bit differently. But I certainly, like you had said, you never want to apologize or, say I'm sorry and give reasons.
You're 100% right about that, because nothing's worse than an audition and they get to the end and you say cut. Yeah, and right there in that moment, consciously or unconsciously, the actor has said, I didn't do a good job. And that's the image you leave them with. You leave them with the impression that you think you didn't do a good job. So yeah, no matter what you really think about it, at least while you're in their presence, you're confident, you're glad of what you did, you're glad of the opportunity, and you get there's this concept called, I think it's le joie d'escalier, which means, the joy of the steps. Your best audition is on the steps leaving afterwards. It's like, oh, wait a minute, now I know how I should have done. The other thing that I want to mention, just briefly talking about leaving the audition, it really should be standard for any professional actor, that at the end of the audition you stop in the waiting room or in your car and make notes on what you did. I made these choices, I took these I thought about this relationship aspect, I used this experience. Whatever it was that got you through that scene that was important, write it down, because when you get the call back, because you said we want to talk about this, that when you get the call back, you will not be starting fresh, or you will not be giving them a random performance based on how you feel that day, but you're going to have your notes based on what they liked, because if they called you back, they liked what you did. And when people ask me, what do you want in the callback? I'm like, you know what you did before? Do that again. So you need to know what you did before, and that's, again, why it has to be the result of choices, not just your gut that day.
I mean, I even suggest that people wear the same clothing that they wore for the initial audition, because I have heard, and once again, everybody has different ideas, but I have heard from some casting directors when they've called somebody back, or a director, and all of a sudden the person, they change their hairstyle, their wardrobe is completely different, and the actor walks in and the director's going, I don't know who this person is. It's like they liked what they saw, they liked what they heard, so give it to them again.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that does think it has to be the exact same thing. I mean, maybe you wear a lighter blue shirt or dark, but if there's any doubt, yeah, I mean, certainly what you talk about, changes in hairstyle or changes in, major changes you don't want to have. But yeah, you want to look pretty much like the person. And if that's in any way difficult or there's too much thought, then yeah, we're exactly the same thing, do exactly the same thing.
And the other thing too is, I guess people should expect, even if the director really loved what you did at the audition and they're thinking, like, I think this person's going to get the part and this is how I want you to read it on the set, they still might ask you to do a few dances and read it very differently. And I'm assuming that's just to make sure that you can take direction in case there are changes that need to be made.
Absolutely. When I am directing a piece, I'll do that. Even if you do come in and if you perform it exactly the way I heard it in my head, I'm going to give you direction just for, like I said, those employee aspects. Make sure that you're a performer that I can work with, a performer that will take direction, a performer that is willing to work with someone. And I alluded to that earlier, because those are the two things we're looking for in the audition. Can you perform? Do you have talent? And can you take direction? Because I know that you don't have all the information, but I know that if you can act and if you can take direction, you can do whatever I throw at you later on, and whatever scenes come up in the script that you haven't seen in these two-page sides. So it's really, really, really important to listen to and take that direction, and hope you get it. Hope that you interest them enough to give you direction. I think an audition in which they ask you to do something different is a successful audition.
And I guess, like, the two things I wanted to ask you about before we wind things up. Let's say in the best case scenario, you book the job, or even if you don't book the job, what are your feelings about an actor sending you, whether it's a postcard, an email, a little letter, saying, "Hey, thanks so much for the opportunity to audition," or "Thanks so much, for the job that I booked. It was great." Is that looking like a sign of being desperate, or do you see that as being good business and a good way to stay in touch with people and let them know that they truly do thank you for the opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's good business for the most part. I think staying in touch in general is. I think postcards. I think the better use of the postcards is saying, I'm in a certain production or I'm appearing in a certain. Not that the director's going to see everything that you've done, but just it reminds them that you are working, that you are employable. I think a thank you for being cast is a nice thing. I think. But you always, as long as it stops short of being, as you say, desperate, as long as it doesn't look like, gosh, I haven't gotten any auditions this year, and this was, it's just, not the kind of tone you want to project. But I think it's good business and a good idea to just, to send a little acknowledgement and stay in front of their awareness a little bit.
And as far as staying in touch, I certainly hear this a lot from actors. There's a casting director who might be casting, let's say, a television series, and they hear about there are certain parts that are being cast, and they will send in a headshot, and they never hear anything, and they send in another headshot for another part that's coming up, and they don't hear. What would you say to to an actor who's consistently submitting for roles that seem like they are, right for, and they just are never brought in to read?
Um, First of all, particularly with the series, keep it up, keep your as long as you're not overdoing, as long as you're not sending something every week. Usually, even with an ongoing series, a couple times a year is probably enough to update it. And then it's hard, but you got to respect the process that that genuinely may be that there's not something right for you. I remember one season of The Wire in particular, which we were casting, and over the course of the whole season, I had 2 roles for white females that I could reasonably cast. And I know that to this day no one believes me because that whole year every actress that I met at every theater thing or every function was sort of gave me that look like, gee, thanks for the audition. But yeah, out of several hundred roles, because when we did have a white female role, it would end up being cast out of New York, or it would be some kind of very specialized kind of thing. So it really can be that a whole season can go by without a role that's really spot on for you. The other thing I'd say is that's a good opportunity to really look at your headshot and say, does my headshot represent me not only appropriately, I mean, is it really honestly appropriate to what I look like and what age I am, but does my headshot make a statement? Or do I have that generic, you could cast me as anything headshot? Because if you have a you could cast me as anything headshot, we're not going to cast you as anything. You got to commit. You got to say, I am this type. I am going to fill this, because remember, we're looking for solutions. When I have a role to fill, I need a solution. I need someone who projects menace or friendliness or trustworthiness or whatever that character is. I need the I'm going to pull out a headshot that projects that same kind of character type. And if your headshot doesn't project any kind of character type, it's never coming out of the pile.
Well, I guess in many ways it's just like the audition. The more generic you make it because you're afraid to, take a chance and head in a specific direction because it might be wrong. Well, it's the same with a headshot. If it's too generic, then you're not going to be really considered for any specific types of parts because people don't have any kind of sense of who you really are.
Absolutely. I mean, it's your agent's job to find you work. It's not the casting. The casting director's job is to fill this role, and it's all role-centered. And we're going to pull the headshots, not even of the people that we feel are the most talented. I mean, that's one of the big myths of casting is we're not really looking for the most talented. We're looking for the best fit for this role. And oftentimes, that's someone who's not especially doesn't have a huge range or isn't especially, Academy Award talented, but it's somebody who's really going to be right on, and the audience is really going to get who this character is, because this is the one role that this person is going to play that's just really going to sing.
Hey, John, just to wind things up right now, if we could just kind of recap some of the steps that people should be taking from the very beginning when they either get the phone call from the agent or they hear about an audition. Would you just kind of like walk people, along the steps that we've just talked about?
Yeah. Let me kind of go down that a little bit, because again, it starts from the big picture in terms of knowing the project, and with that, you're going to ask yourself, what's the medium? Is it film, TV, commercial, industrial? What kind of a project it is? Is it dramatic or comedic? How is that going to change my performance? And what's the style of the project? What do I know about that series or that director or that network? What kind of stylistic choices do they make? And then once you have that sense of that project, then you're going to begin to analyze the particular scene that you've been given. Ask yourself, what's the purpose of that scene, and make that as specific as you can. We didn't talk about the dynamic, but what's kind of the flow and the movement and the feeling of the scene? Whose scene is it? What do I learn from the stage directions about what's going on? Like I said, standing up. You might not want to do that, but that might tell you something about your character. And then lastly, what does the dialogue tell me? Not just the actual literal information, but the way the dialogue is written. Does this character speak in intelligent long sentences? Is it mostly questions? Is it abbreviated? The way the dialogue is written. We didn't talk as much, but I just want to mention that then the next step beyond that is going to be to begin to choose a character. And you're going to look at your relationship to the other characters in the scene and what they reveal about your character. And you're going to look at, instead of motivation, I always put it in terms of sort of like, what's my initial condition? How do I start the scene? Do I undergo a change? And if you're not the lead, you might not. Your character may not have that great change moment that you wish you could do as an actor. But do I undergo a change? And if so, it's really specifically, what is that change? What is that moment in the script that sparks that change, and how do I play it out? So look at that, because you're going to choose a character. And the reason I put this next to last is because the character's not going to be given. You're choosing a character. You're choosing a character that fulfills the purpose of the scene and that fits within the kind of project it is. So you need to know those two things before you then choose the character, not find it. And then the last thing that I want to go over is understanding the audition itself, because you can get some information by saying, why did they choose this scene? And my character's probably, maybe it's in 3 or 4 scenes, but they chose this one scene where my character is hiding a secret, or where my character is in a hurry, or my character's relaxed. Because the scene that we chose, unless there is only one scene, we're going to choose the scene that we think on the casting side is the most definitive of that character, is what's going to tell us the most about the kind of performer we're looking for. So that can tell you something about the kind of performer we're looking for. And then lastly, what did they see in me that's right for that role? Because obviously, if we called you in, if we gave you this appointment, there's something in your headshot or something in our experience with you or something in the kinds of roles that we've seen you play before that, regardless of the character description, we think could really work for this. So to that degree, you want to be aware of what your skills are, but also what your personality type and how people read you and how people take you. And the more self-aware, and that takes a lot of work, and that's something that's really hard to do. But you need to be that self-aware to figure out, well, what did we probably see that we want you to play to, not play against.
Hey, John, what I think would be great for everybody, if maybe you could give us one exercise that everybody could do today or tomorrow, whenever they want to get started with it, but just one thing to really start practicing and using your ideas.
Sure. One simple thing you can do is find a scene online. Either grab a clip from IMDb or from Netflix or something you have TiVoed, but find a scene, preferably not even a long scene, something that would just be 1 or 2 minutes, and look at the character. Don't look at the main character. Don't look at the star, but look at the supporting character, the guest character. And look at that as if that's an audition scene that you've got, and ask yourself, I want you 3 questions about that scene. So first of all, look at the scene and say, okay, what is the purpose of that scene? What is it, a character or plot scene? What are we trying to show the audience in that scene? And then ask yourself, well, what choices did that performer make to try to carry out the purpose of the scene, or in their performance of the scene? And then ask yourself, do I agree with those choices? Would I make those choices, or would I make different choices? And ask yourself those 3 questions, and watch that scene again, and that should sort of help begin to get you in the mindset of thinking of a scene in terms of what its purpose is and how you carry that out.
Well, thank you very much. John, your information is phenomenal. I want to make sure that everybody knows that John wrote a book, and it's called The Audition Book, and you can go to his website, or the website for this particular book, theauditionbook.com, to get a copy. I highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal book. Joel, if you would be able to let people know how they can ask questions to us at this point, that would be great. But John, thank you so much for this incredible session.
Thank you for having me out.
Okay, if you're just listening, this is Joel Mark Witt once again. We're ready to do our question and answer time period today. And I've got John and Aaron ready. If you can just notice the video just went away. But that's so we can have everybody tied together audio and you can ask your questions. We've already got some questions coming in. If you've got a question for us today, there's a little box just below the video player where you can put your name and your question into that box and you can ask it. We've got some that have already come in. So if you've got a question from the interview here, from the session, go ahead and put your question into that box, hit submit. It'll send an email to me, and I'll pull it up and read it to John and Aaron live on the air. So guys, let's get right to questions here if you're ready.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, the first question is from Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks, how do casting directors feel about direct submissions? Is there a difference in this between smaller and larger markets?
Absolutely. There's a difference. In New York and LA, they're not going to look favorably on direct submissions at all. They want exclusively through agents and managers. But I'm thinking almost anywhere outside of those markets, it's much more open to direct submissions. And in fact, outside of those markets, unless you have an agent, you really have to be aggressive about being your own marketer and your own agent. So I'd say definitely, at the worst case scenario, they get your headshot and they don't like that you sent it and they toss it out. But if you're not sending your headshot in, you're not in consideration. So outside of those choose markets, definitely do direct submissions.
So
I'm sorry, I was just going to jump in for 1 second. And, and one other thing that people can do, especially if you are living in a smaller market, what you can do is if you have an agent, what you can do is still submit yourself, just so you're not just waiting by the phones and you're being very proactive. But in your cover letter, make sure that it's very clear that you are represented by, and then put your agent's name. And on your resume, make sure that you only have your agent's name and contact information. And that way they know that you have representation.
Okay. You guys also, maybe just for people that are just starting out, they might be brand new. What do they mean by what does she mean by direct submission?
So she's saying is rather than counting on your agent or manager to do the marketing and to make sure that your headshot is submitted to the appropriate projects and the appropriate casting directors, that you yourself are going to look at the casting listings either in your area or in, Variety or Hollywood Reporter or through whatever sources that you might have, and be sending your headshot in directly. And as Aaron said, even my friends who are working in Hollywood or New York are keeping an eye on that kind of things themselves, because they're not really counting on unless they're really, really certain, they're not really counting on their agents to see everything. So they're often doing their own submissions, but as if it's coming from the agent with the agent's contact information on it.
And I know this isn't part of the question, and I know we also should probably be moving on to all the other questions, but this idea just came to my head, and I thought it would be helpful. For those of you who are trying to find out about different projects that are happening in your area, you can always try the local film commission website and see if they have listings. And there are also some really good local listservs where people send out tons of information about auditions for various projects. So that would be another way of being able to submit yourself.
Okay, great. So this question's from Carol. Carol starts off her question with a statement. She says, "It's crucial to look like our pictures, for sure. But other than that, what makes a photo pop for you or want to bring in that person?"
Good question, Carol. For me, it requires a little bit of self-reflection, but it's really got to, and I think I said this, it's really got to speak to the character that I'm looking for. Now, of course, you don't necessarily always know what that's going to be, but make sure that your headshot, it has some kind of character. It has some kind of statement about the kind of role that you can play. And that's always, as I said, it's a scary thing, because then you feel like you're cutting yourself out of other kinds of roles. But having a generic I can do anything headshot, that's the death. So A, the headshot has to suggest some kind of character. And B, for me, it's all about the eyes. I have to look at those eyes. I don't care if there's a hair out of place, or if your lipstick is a little smudged or the collar was turned up. But I got to be able to look in your eyes, and I got to be able to see a spark. I got to be able to see some kind of intelligence and some kind of character, and not just a pose.
And although I realize this isn't a workshop about headshots, but just a couple of really quick things. One of the ways to get and I agree with John 100%. One of the ways to get a specific look and have that energy shooting out of your eyes and grabbing people's attention is to be thinking during the photo shoot. So when the photographer says, "Okay, let me see a nice smile," you can't just do one of these generic blank looking styles. What you really need to be doing is feeling the character and projecting it. And when you've got that life activity happening in your brain, that's what allows your eyes to just pop out. And on a little bit of a side note, as far as what makes a good headshot, the other thing too is you also have to make sure that you do not have anything in the shot that's going to distract people from looking at you. And so, and once again, we'll probably have a workshop just dealing with headshots at some point, but make sure that your wardrobe fits the character that you're trying to present, and make sure that it doesn't stand out in any way, because then people aren't just looking at you.
Now, I'm going to back up for that a little bit to say that what Aaron and I are saying then requires that you, as the performer, have some sense of what kind of character you can play. And that's something that may take a little experience, a little bit of reflection, and maybe talking to some of your other actor friends, but being realistic about the kinds of characters that not the kind of characters that you want to play, but the kind of characters that you can get booked for, the kind of characters that you're realistically going to get hired for. And so you kind of have to have a good sense of that before you go into that headshot session.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at my headshot, which you see, right on your monitor, basically you're going to see that I'm not going to be the head of a motorcycle gang, and I know that surprises people sometimes, but I know the kinds of roles that I typically get hired for, and it's the dad, it's the nice guy, somebody you feel comfortable with, the family practitioner, the doctor, the attorney. And that's not to say that sometimes you can't do something a little bit different. Like when I just shot in America's Most Wanted, I was the manager of a strip club. So normally you look at that
Yeah,
headshot
I
and you
can see
don't
that.
see that. Normally you don't see that, but they happened to like my read and they knew that, with the right look, with the right wardrobe, I could pull it off. And actually I did, I thought it did work out pretty well, but that's the exception to the rule. So yeah, you just really want to make sure that you have an understanding. And sometimes it's a matter of asking other agents how they see you being booked. Maybe you can ask photographers how they would cast you, for commercial modeling jobs. But it really, or even sometimes just asking strangers, might meet at a party. I know it's a kind of
Don't
funny.
ask a stranger if you look like a strip club owner. They might get that.
Well, that's not
Jeez.
exactly what I meant, but somebody that doesn't know you at all, doesn't know your background, and ask them, look, if you were a casting director, how would you cast me? What kind of look would you think I could fit into? And listen to what a lot of people have to say, filter out the stuff that's kind of meaningless, but you might find that there are certain looks that people consistently come up from people's mouths. So listen to what people have to say as well, and then make your own decision.
Okay, great. So if you'd like to ask a question, we've got a place for you to ask questions right on this same page. Just scroll down to the question field, enter your question there. It'll send an email to me. I'm able to ask Aaron and John live on the air that question, so feel free to ask away. We were talking earlier, John, when you and Aaron were talking, you were talking about making choices as an actor. You were talking about, as a casting director, you're really looking to make choices. And so Jennifer writes in and says, John, can you please go over your ideas about choices again? Thanks.
The idea is that you're making choices with purpose, that you're making it, that every choice that you make, because I always say, and I have examples that I use in the live workshops, that there's 100 realistic ways to play the scene, depending upon the kind of character you are. So realism is usually a bad benchmark. So this goes back to what I was saying, that you have to have an idea of what does this scene need to accomplish? What does the director want this scene to accomplish? And then every choice you make, whether it's, am I going to play the scene quickly or slowly? Am I going to play the scene loud or soft? Am I going to take a pause? Am I going to be very physical, or am I going to be still? Whatever choice that you need to make as a performer, the choice is based on, is it more or less effective in serving the purpose and achieving the purpose of that scene? And almost anything that you can bring to bear, like those things that I said, or we talked about whether you're going to use props or any of those kinds of things. Every one of those things is a choice, and anything that is a choice, it's important to make a choice. And I tell a story about when I was a student and doing a scene, and I was, as a student, pretty nervous, and my foot was sort of shaking underneath the table. And the director said, wow, that was great, because even though your character was very confident, under the table we could see that you're having this little nervous tick. And I realized that nothing is not a choice. And maybe that's a good way to answer that question. Nothing is not a choice. If I see it on the frame, even though you may not have thought, oh, I'm going to make this a part of my character, it becomes a part of the character. And we struggle as an audience to find meaning for that hair flip, or that reason you scratched your ear, or that reason that you took a pause before that word. So it's hard for me to narrow down what's a choice, because everything's a choice. Just make sure that what you're doing is the result of deliberate choices towards that purpose. And as I said, not the bane of my existence, going with your gut.
But one of the things that's also nice with using that philosophy is the fact that when you do the audition, the casting director and the director, they both realize you are making a choice, and you don't know whether it's the choice that they are looking for or not. But the thing is, if it's a powerful choice, if it's done well, if it's done accurately, if it's believable, and on top of that, you physically look right for the part, it's like, why wouldn't you be brought in for a callback? And then that's when they can give you some more details as to specifically what they are looking for, if they happen to know at that point. Hopefully at the callback time, and John, maybe you can talk about this. I would assume that when you're in in a callback situation, that with the director being there, they're going to have a better idea of what they want the actor to do, and then they can share that with you, and then you can start making some changes.
Yeah, and it's one of the, there aren't many things that I recommend that I'd call a trick. And I keep people ask me that. What's a good trick? But a good trick in the callback is ask a question, one pointed, deliberate question, so that you can tap into what you were just talking about, Aaron. Where once you get the director to talk and to give you advice, or to give you, most directors will then go on at some length, and then all of a sudden you're in a relationship with that director and he's directing you, and most directors like that the callback becomes, maybe I'm going to say the first rehearsal, but maybe their only rehearsal. It may be the only time they have to work with you before you show up in makeup on set. So that callback is a good time when they have a better sense of what they've seen and what choices they like, and that you can tap into that.
Okay, great, guys. So we've got another question from Elizabeth. She says, how do casting directors feel about self-advertising with postcards?
That's a very good thing. And I'm only hesitating because I've known too many actors that went over the top with it, and we started to get a postcard every week or every 3 days. And in one case, we actually started like taking magic markers and decorating the postcards, and we made an art piece on our wall, and it just went way too far in the self-promotion. But the idea of the postcard is a really good one. A, just to make sure that your face is familiar, that it kind of stays in front of the casting director, and B, the postcard has to be to some purpose other than that. It has to be saying, look, I've got this America's Most Wanted coming up. Hope you can check it out. Look, I'm opening in a show downtown, call me for tickets. The more you can use that postcard to remind a casting director that you are working, that other people are hiring you, the better. That's going to give the casting director confidence to say, okay, I'm not crazy if I bring this person in because other people are hiring this person as well. So yeah, within reason, the postcard's a good tool.
And the other thing too is, let's say you haven't booked a job recently. Sometimes you can just say, hey, I just finished a class, at some place, I just studied with somebody. And in some ways, assuming that you've had some experience, in some ways, I wouldn't say it's irrelevant what you say in that postcard, but the most important part is for them to remember that you are around, because it is so easy to be forgotten in this business. You could have worked with somebody for years, and maybe there's somebody new who is helping to bring people in for castings, or even if it's an agent and you're trying to find representation and there's somebody new there and they just don't know who you are. And for those of you who don't want to spend money on postcards right now, and you only have a handful of people that you want to stay in touch with, a more economical way is simply to send a letter. And in today's time period, in some ways that will stand out even more than a postcard, just because it's unusual for people to send things, in a letter form. Now, if you do that, if you go that route, then I would make sure that your headshot is on the top of your letterhead, nice and clear. Make sure it's printed really well, and you're going to have your name and your contact information, and then just type it and then print out what you would like to say, and that way you don't have to spend as much money printing up 25, 50, or 100 postcards if you only need to send out 3 or 4 letters. So that's just another option.
And the other caveat with that is, whether it's postcard or letter, don't use that opportunity to remind them that they're not calling you. Don't send the postcard that says, gee, I haven't heard from you in a little while. What's up? Or, gee, I sure, haven't worked in a long time. Would love to, just keep it professional and keep it with the idea that that you're not desperate.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I'm sorry. That's just, it kind of reminded me of somebody who told me about a letter that they got, and they were saying, well, I'm getting auditions and booking things with many other people in town, and I haven't heard from you. so that's a great point. Just make sure you're not insulting them, in any way, and just it's a gentle reminder that I'm still, that you're still around and you're available and would love to audition with them.
Okay. Giovanna asks, John, Strawbridge said, "Ignore your scene partner." Do you actually mean to play the reactions as I would normally play them, regardless of the choices of my scene partner?
I do, but I want to be clear that that's only in the audition circumstance. I would never advise that on set or on a shoot, because everything changes then. That's one of the few things that's really, really different in an audition, is that if the actor or the intern that you're auditioning with is not giving you reactions that feed with what you were had planned for the scene or what your reality of the scene. Yeah, you've got to be able to play the scene as you had rehearsed it, as you'd planned it. So to that degree, you want to ignore the false cues that they're giving you. And if you haven't experienced this on set, that's a real reality that when you get onto set, it's possible that the actor that you're going to play the scene with may not be there. You may be getting fed lines by a production assistant or a script supervisor or a stand-in, although that's not supposed to happen. But it's a skill that you've got to be able to have as an actor regardless, that you can play the scene even if you're getting nothing back, because it can well happen that you might not be getting anything back. You might be playing, as a friend of Aaron and mine tells a story about playing a scene to a tennis ball on a stick, because that's where they had to direct his eye line. So yeah.
And actually, and John, I know that we're supposed to be Q&A right now, but I wanted to ask you about this. I know that sometimes when I've auditioned and they hire a reader, who's reading opposite me, and I realize that sometimes those are actors who are, I know they're getting paid to do that, but sometimes they're trying to impress, the casting director, and they're trying to impress the director. And
not
one
sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Every time. Every time.
And I guess one of the tricky things is sometimes they aren't really given much more detailed information about characters than the person auditioning, who's actually auditioning.
And it goes back to that idea that we talked about in the last question, which is the object of the audition really is not to nail it. It's not to get the right answer. And again, eliminate from your thinking the idea of the audition is to get it right. The idea is to impress them that you've made choices, that you can carry out those choices, and that you are at least worth giving direction to. So again, make sure what I don't want is for your scene partner to derail you to the point where all of a sudden your scene is muddy, or it's off track, or it's off focus, and it doesn't add up to anything. It's better that it adds up to the wrong thing, but it still adds up, than that you've let yourself be taken out of your plan for what you want to do.
Yeah, and I know that certainly has happened with me when I've auditioned, for people who just do theater, and they're not used to auditioning for film or TV, and I'm trying to do a scene with them, and I'm standing literally, a foot and a half away, and they're screaming at me like they're trying to hit the back wall, the back row of the theater. And so you got to make a choice. Either you kind of start a shouting match so it looks like you guys are, working together, or John, like you were saying, you just make a decision. Look, the chemistry is not going to work here. The scene's not going to be really connected with the other actor. So basically what I'm doing is I'm showcasing my skills, my thoughts, what I think is the right way to do it. And, the hope is that they see that, and they also see, the person just decided that it wasn't working, trying to play with the other actor for that one.
Right.
Okay, we got more questions coming in. This one's from Carol. Carol says, branding. I get that's how others envision me, not how I see myself. 2 producers see me as a character-y waitress. Certainly I can play other characters and not just a waitress. So how should I interpret this? How do I find my essence? Thanks.
Well, the key, this is a common misdirection for actors, because the key word in what you just said there is not waitress, it's character-y. So what they're saying is we see you as a character-y receptionist, or we see you as a character-y soccer mom, or a character-y taxi driver, or whatever it is. It's not significant really that they see you as a waitress, but that they see you as probably a supporting character. The best friend, or the confidant, or the quirky coworker. So then you've got to determine with a little bit more thought, what do they mean by quote unquote character-y? Do they mean quirky? Do they mean eccentric? Do they mean melodramatic, or whatever it is that you think that they're trying to get to? But it's that adjective is more important than the noun.
And the thing that's interesting is I know sometimes people get very upset when they start hearing, well, I want to be the star, I want to be the lead in this. And let me just tell you, there are a lot of people who are, co-stars, who are the best friend, who've made an incredible living and have had the opportunity to work on many, many interesting projects, who play, the quirky person. So I would take that as a compliment. And if that is true, just because one or two people say it doesn't mean that it's universal. But if that is true, then use that to your advantage.
Yeah, there's a quote from an old character actor guy who used to do westerns that said, "I was never a star, but I lent a lot of them money." Because the supporting players, the character actors, they will work and they've got a lifetime of work, whereas the star, you might have a good decade. I mean, aside if you're not Brad Pitt. But I know those kinds of character and supporting roles is really what you should be aiming for.
Yeah. Okay. So you were talking earlier, John, during the first part of the session about slate, and Jennifer just writes in and says, "What is slate? What do you mean by slate?"
Good. Thank you for not just wondering, Jennifer. That the slate is usually at the beginning of a videotaped audition, and it'd only be for an audition, usually only for a videotaped, when they're going to ask you to identify yourself and the role that you're playing. And there's a couple of different ways this can happen. When you're in the major markets, New York or LA, you may say something like, "Hi, I'm John Strawbridge. I'm represented by CAA, and I'm auditioning for the role of Jack." If you're in another market where you don't have representation, you're probably going to leave that point out. If it's a live monologue audition, you're going to identify the name of the piece that you're reading, but you're not going to do that for film or TV because everybody's reading the same piece. So there's no particular one way to answer that other than generally, which is it's how at the beginning of a videotape or beginning of an audition, you're going to give the people your name and either what you're reading or who you're represented by. It's a very mechanical kind of thing.
And I can tell you that I found that it varies. It's a slight variation.
Yeah.
Every time I audition, sometimes if I'm auditioning at home and I'm shooting the audition at home and emailing it in, different casting directors want things done differently. Sometimes they will ask for your name, your height, your weight, your agent, and the character. And then sometimes they want the camera to pan, go all the way down to the floor and then back up to your face so they can see body type. Sometimes they want this at the beginning before you actually start the audition. Sometimes they ask for it at the very end. And sometimes nothing happens. I remember being at an audition in New York and I said, "Well, do you want me to slate?" And they said, no, everything's in the computer.
Right,
so
yeah. There's no one way it's done, but it's basically giving the people who are going to look at your audition the information they don't already have.
And I'm sorry, and I was just going to say, what's really helpful is before the audition, you can ask, "Do you want me to slate?" And if they say yes, then you can ask them, another question. "What specifically would you like me to say in the slate? Just my name and my agent and the character, or what would you like?" So that way, you let them tell you what they want.
And keep it business-like. Don't try to be in character for the slate. Don't try to be too, just rattle it off. Don't overcomplicate the slate.
Hey, I'm sorry, and I've got to jump in here because I know John and I had this discussion once. I've heard, and once again, there are so many things in this business that are very subjective, and everybody has a different opinion. For that slate, I've heard some casting directors say, "I want to see you in character. I want to see that character," and then just continue with the audition in character. And John, I remember when I talked with you about it, and you have the complete opposite.
Complete opposite.
So why don't you?
Well, I mean, again, first of all, I'm a little distrustful of actors that are so tenuous on their character that they have to come into the room in character, they have to ask you the question in character, they have to do the slate in character, because that makes me nervous. It's like, is it that hard for you to hold on to the character? And that may be that I'm overgeneralizing a little bit, but it's that's the kind of thing that preys on my mind. I'm much more impressed by an actor that can be themselves and then get into character, because that's much more the skill set that I'm looking for on set. That's the kind of actor that I want to send to a film or TV set, because things are going to change too quickly. It's different in theater, but on a film set, things change too quickly, and scenes and plans and setups change too quickly. So I want actors that are adaptable.
Okay.
And yeah, all right, I'll leave it there.
Oh, that's good. So Jamie asks a question, simple question. Do shorter people have more trouble booking jobs than taller people?
No, I wouldn't think that's a generalization you can make. In fact, I had a college student in a session I did a couple months ago. He said, somebody told me I was just too tall, that I was never going to make it. And this guy was like 6'2", which is not crazy tall. It's above average, but it's not nuts. I think everybody's self-conscious about what they think stands out. But other than there's a truism in sort of runway modeling about height and weight perceptions that people think apply to the whole industry. And certainly when you're dealing with the supporting cast, the 60 or 70 people other than the leads, there's no restrictions about height, no overall restrictions about height and weight. Now, if we've got to match you up to someone playing your spouse, or someone in particular you got to be in the scene with that we've got to reasonably be able to frame, then we might consider that, but not necessarily that you're too short or maybe that person's too tall. It's just a picture that we have to put together. But no, I would not say in general, I would not say to anybody going into the business categorically, you're too short or you're too tall or you're too whatever.
Yeah, ask Danny DeVito.
Right.
He's a guy who's
and he became famous playing an intimidating character. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we got a question from Marcus. He says, is it all right to have a variety of looks and emotions in your portfolio when you go in for an audition?
Well, let me jump in for that one first, because when you are auditioning for film, television, any acting job per se, you do not want to bring in a portfolio. You do not want to bring in anything that lets people know that you do modeling, because everybody that I've spoken with, people still have this misconception, oh, you're a model, you can't act. So when you're going into the audition and reading for a casting director, all you're going to bring in is a headshot with the resume. And I can tell you the only exception to the rule, and this has only happened a couple of times for me, where I was auditioning for a television commercial, and the character, and this was like a real character that they were looking for, I happened to have on my composite sheet. So that's the only time where I've ever brought in a composite sheet to an actual audition. Now, I also brought in my headshot, so I gave them both. But typically, if it's going to be an audition, hide your composite sheets, hide your portfolios, and just bring in your headshot and resume.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate that difference between commercial and to some degree industrial film versus legit feature film or network television, where they're really going to look down on the fact that you might be a model.
Actually, John, would you explain industrial films just so everybody knows?
Sure. An industrial film is any project which is not for the general public, that is going to be shown either that's being made within a company to educate the employees, or it's being made by the government. Like whenever I'm on jury duty, they have a little video called "You the Jury" that explains what's going to happen to you on jury duty. That's an industrial. Educational projects, any of those instructional or teaching or informational kind of videos that are made not for the public but specifically for a segment of a company or a group.
Okay. We have a question from Lucia. Mm-hmm. I have been asked to come back for a screen test. How different is that from the first audition, and how differently do I need to prepare for this audition?
Depending upon how sometimes people use the term incorrectly, but the main difference is going to be that they're going to be probably more interested in seeing how you look on camera, maybe do a little bit of makeup, a little bit of costume, a little bit of lighting, get a better sense of what you look like. Maybe they want to see you with someone else they've already cast, see if the two of you kind of work together, if they believe that you are brother or sister or couple or whatever it's supposed to be. maybe they want to be able to see the two of you play the scene together with a bit more direction. And this is a good example of a time that you absolutely would want to listen to your scene partner, because they would really want to be seeing that the two of you are gelling as a relationship, as characters on screen. How are you going to prepare differently? I wouldn't prepare a lot differently, because whatever you did, they liked. That's why they're having you in for a screen test. So pretty much come in with the same kind of mindset, the same kind of, wardrobe, or if they've directed that differently. But the preparation is pretty much the same, as far as knowing, having some ideas about what the project is calling for, what the style of the project is, and making some choices about the scene. Just be prepared to go a little bit more into sort of a three-dimensional performance.
Okay. Kathy asks, if an actor is interested in a role but cannot attend the audition day specified, is it acceptable to ask to submit an online audition, or just to not respond to the audition at all due to the conflict?
Never. I'm sorry, we done there?
Yeah, that's the first. She has another follow-up question, different, but this is the first one.
Definitely respond, because the most frustrating thing is to ask somebody to come in for an audition or call back and then never hear. And I know actors are nervous. They never want to say no, and they never want to send the turn down. But it's much more frustrating to not know whatever happened to you. It is fair to ask if there's another day that the sessions are ongoing, or if you can do a video or online submission, because that's becoming so much more common, that it's a pretty common thing. So yeah, it's certainly fair to ask those questions. If none of those can happen and they don't have another day they're seeing people, then you've got to be, with grace, able to say, well, I'm sorry, I really wished I could have come in for this, but I'm not going to be available for that. Call me again next time. But it's fair to ask.
And and the other thing too is, I know, as an actor, it's easy to start feeling paranoid. They're never going to call me again. They're going to hate me. They're going to think I'm irresponsible. At least sometimes that goes into my head. But the thing that actually can be seen as a very positive way of dealing with that is the fact that, hey, I'm sorry, I'm already booked out on that date. So you're letting, whether it's a job, who knows, they're not going to ask you, oh yeah, well, what's the job? But, when you let somebody know, oh, I'd love to come in with that, for that audition. I'm already booked out though. What you're doing is you're letting them know that you are working and that people like hiring you. And I think in some ways, that can be viewed in a real positive way. I mean, certainly it's better if you can go, but look, those things also, they happen. I mean, I was just in a situation where I was auditioning for a TV show, and I couldn't make the initial audition, and I told them, and they gave me another day, and I was able to go in there, and I did the audition, and I was just emailed saying, well, they'd like to call me back, and I'm not available that day. And I gave them some days where I was available, and I haven't heard back yet. But that's also a sign that you're workable, and that you are, your people like what you do.
Okay, just real quick, guys, I have a follow-up to that. Have you had a lot of experience, John? Do you cast using video, or are you always bringing people in live to see you?
More and more, we're starting to use video and online stuff. I have always and will continue to always prefer to have the person in person, just because when I do auditions, I do like to give people a little bit of direction. Probably not much, but I like to have them rehearse. Maybe give them a little bit of a tweak or an adjustment, and then put that one on tape, which not every casting director does. I don't always care for the on video auditions, because I feel like then the person is getting direction from someone else, or a helpful friend, or somebody that's taking them in a bad direction. But I'm not opposed to it. I just greatly prefer to have people in person. But I think it's something that's, and frankly, regardless of what I do, is something that's only going to become more and more common as it becomes more and more easy to do online and video auditions.
Well, I can tell you that in Los Angeles, with some exceptions to the rule, pretty much you've got to be there, and part of that is because there are so many people who are available and they do want to see you in person, and things happen quite often at the last minute, and that's true for New York as well. What I do find is that sometimes in secondary markets, they will allow actors to put themselves on tape more readily, just because they realize they want to hire actors outside the area, because they might have already used used most of the actors locally, and so they're always looking for new people, and they realize not everybody's going to be able to, fly in or drive 10 hours or 12 hours to go to an audition. But like John was saying, from an actor's point of view, I always prefer to audition live. As a matter of fact, there's a casting director who's about 5 hours away from me. And sometimes, I'll get the phone call, and even if it's a small part, certainly it would be much easier for me to be in my home, shoot the audition, email it in. But without a doubt, my audition is always better when I do it in person, because the casting director is really good. She's able to give me direction. She knows more about the project than I do. And so sometimes it's just a couple little words here and there that can completely change my read. So even though sometimes, driving 10 hours one day is not so much fun, it without a doubt, I will get and give a much, much better audition if I do it in person.
Okay. So last call for questions. We have about 3 to 4 more questions so far. If you do want to ask another question, do that now. We're going to probably take just about 2 more after these here. Kathy has a quick follow-up question, and she says, pertaining to children, what's your view on braces? Is it okay for kids to have braces, or as a casting director, do you automatically disregard them?
That's really more for the director. That's kind of a hard question to answer. Certainly, I'm not opposed or afraid of all braces in the audition process. And I got to say, just based on experience, most of the time, directors are not willing to hire someone with braces. But we have a lot of parents who say, she's wearing braces in the audition, but we'll get them off for the shoot, and then we'll put them back on. And of course, that's depending upon whether or not you're actually willing to do that. But a lot of parents are, and it's probably more common for that to happen, where they say, okay, we're going to audition with braces, but we'll take them off for the shoot if you need them, because directors seem to be, for the most part, nothing's 100%, but for the most part, directors would prefer not to see braces on camera.
But as far as, and I know there's a little bit different, but as far as trying to get representation with an agent, we're not talking about casting. From what most agents tell me with kids is that, look, they understand that having braces is not a permanent thing, and that if they like the kid and the kid's studying and, doing work and maybe, doing some projects, so they're getting some experience, they realize that they will come off at some point. So, if your child has braces and you feel like that's something that's going to be helpful to them to have, keep the braces on. And then, like John was saying, like if it's a big enough project and you want to go through that, expense and all that time of, taking them off and putting them back on, that is always an option. But, just keep in mind, it's not a permanent thing. And at some point, the braces will come off.
Okay, great. So Sybil asks, would it handicap you from other roles if you take a photo in a character uniform, like a nurse outfit?
Yes. Yeah, that for me would be, way too specific as far as capturing that sense of character in the headshot. Like I said about wardrobe for your audition, when I talked about being not inappropriate, I think your headshot wardrobe wants to be the same thing. If you really want to target that nurse thing, go with a wardrobe that's not out of the question for a nurse, but more focus on, again, your expression is going to give me a sense of caring or a sense of professionalism or a sense of confidence or whatever that is about the character of nurse rather than the label of nurse. And in fact, I'm going to go so far as to say when people send me for film and TV, not for commercial, but when people send me headshots in costume, it's a really bad sign, because I really feel like, okay, if you have to do this to get me to believe that you can be a nurse, then your acting must be really lacking. I mean, if you feel like you got to rely on this prop or this costume, I got 100 other people that are just asking me to rely on their talent. So it's kind of a bad message to send.
But I can tell you, if you are interested in commercial modeling, then that could be incredible, because
right, it's a whole different.
Yeah, it's a whole different situation. But for that, yeah, you want to set up a shot that, and once again, this is for another seminar, but just real quickly, you're going to set up a shot that looks like an ad and you are a nurse and you're dealing with a patient, and that would be fantastic. But I agree with John 100%. I mean, for a headshot, I don't think you would be taken very seriously as an actor as well.
Okay. Eddie says, question about having different headshots. I learned about doing this from Aaron. It was a great idea. I keep 3 on file. I got a principal role for a casino commercial shoot. The casting director told me I was picked because my headshot looked like I had a lot of energy and character. I've had great success because of different headshots. Not so much a question. I guess he didn't have a question. He was just making a comment. So. But anyway, it's good feedback.
You're right, Eddie. That was good advice Aaron gave you. Yeah, I mean, most actors, once you're into the business a little bit, you want to have sort of a straight dramatic shot, maybe a character/commercial shot. And then in markets like, where there's a lot of industrial stuff, a lot of people like to have their corporate /industrial shot, which is more of a business kind of thing. So that's a good kind of basic 3 for a lot of markets.
Yeah, but when you're first getting started, I wouldn't, spend the time and money, trying to put get one really good headshot and use that when you're first getting started.
Right.
Kathy says, in response to John's comment about callbacks, we had an experience where casting was interested in my son for a callback day. Unfortunately, he was booked on the callback day. They wouldn't budge due to their schedule and a client coming in, so he was not considered. It was upsetting. I wish I would have known, because it seems rude to ask if there is a callback date at the audition before you even know if you're considered for one. Callback dates aren't always noted in the audition info. Suggestions? How often does a casting director like to see or just give me suggestions on that. I'm sorry, this is another part of a different question, I guess. And I can ask that offline probably.
Yeah, this may not be a hugely satisfactory answer for you, because it's just the reality of business, of any business, and the acting business in particular. There are going to be exactly that kind of circumstance where things just aren't going to work out, and very often the casting directors, they're literally not able to know what the callback date is going to be as they begin the auditions. And usually when we have a callback date, that's the one day that the production has said, okay, you can have the director from 8 a.m. to 9:45, and then he's off on a location scout. We get exactly that amount of time with the director, and that's all that we get. So in that kind of circumstance, there's no solution. If somebody's legitimately booked on another kind of thing, then that opportunity didn't work out for you, and you got to. And again, this is the part you're not going to like, but you got to be able to kind of take that roll with that punch and take that kind of disappointment with the grace and say, okay, that's the business. I can't give you a solution for that. Conflicts happen, and you're going to have to just work with it.
Hey, well, John, let me ask you. Typically, when you are sending out information about an audition date, I know that not all the time, but quite often you will have shoot dates or approximate shoot dates. Are you generally given callback dates at that same time?
Almost never. Usually we're getting that on the fly or at the last minute or whenever we can kind of carve out a piece for the director. And usually I'm setting up callbacks the night before. Almost invariably, if I've got callbacks Friday at 9 a.m., then I can start setting up callbacks on Thursday at 4. So it's going to be very short kind of notice for all of us. Is it ideal? No. I wish the whole business could be scheduled a month out. It just isn't the way the business kind of comes down. So my first response about asking for another day, that only applies really. Well, I mean, it's always fair to ask, but it's only likely to happen on a first round audition. It's not likely to happen on a callback audition.
Well, and actually, hey, Kathy, just for you, as frustrating as that is, on the positive side, that means that the casting director, as well as your agent, knows that you got a callback. They liked what you did, or they liked what your son did. So that's a very positive thing. And, they also understand that you are working in this business, and sometimes you're not going to be available when they want you to be. And so it's a two-way street. And the other flip side is there are also sometimes where it's just unbelievable how the days work out in your favor. It seems like it's, those things seem to even themselves out, where all of a sudden, you get a job, and then there's another job, and then it just falls right in between 2 other days that are free. And so, yeah, it can be frustrating, but that's a nice kind of frustration to have. That means that they really liked what your son did.
Very good. Okay, we got one more question, guys, and then we're going to wrap up for today. And this is actually a really good question to close out on, particularly because I know probably a lot of actors deal with this. Frank asks, can you give some good tips on how an actor can lessen their nervousness while they wait to be called at an audition site? So nervousness. Good. How do you deal with it?
For me, the best way to deal with that, I'm going to give you two answers to that. The first is to do the kinds of things we've been talking about today, that by looking at a scene with purpose, looking at what needs to be accomplished and what you can, making some specific choices to accomplish that. Since I've said repeatedly, the point of that exercise is not to get the right answer. The point really is to eliminate nervousness, that you feel like, and you're never going to be completely free of nerves, but the point is that you're going to be able to go into that audition and at least feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm not just going there without a safety net. And you're going to feel much less nervous if you've got this plan and you've got these beats that you want to hit and these choices that you want to accomplish. Maybe you won't make them all happen, but that's what you're focused on, rather than the nerves of feeling like, okay, I got to prove myself, I got to do a good job, You're going in there, okay, I want to take this beat, I want to raise my voice here, I want to look up, whatever those choices are. Having that plan is your best defense against nervousness. My second answer to that is, and I'm glad for the opportunity to bring this up, like any artist, whether you're a musician, a singer, a dancer, a painter, whatever it is, none of this is going to work if you only are doing this when you go in that day for the audition. It's vital that you are getting scene books, getting scenes offline, recording scenes off television, whatever you're going to do, and practicing these skills at home or in a play reading group with your friends, or putting a group of people together that you practice with each other or by yourself. But you, as an actor, you've got to practice like any other artist, and so make sure that you're pulling scenes and that you're trying to figure out what those scenes are about, what they're trying to accomplish, and what choices you would make. And you need to be doing that over and over and over again, so that by the time you go in for that audition, that's the 15th time this week you've done that, not the first time. And that's the other best thing that you can do to help eliminate those nerves.
And on another side note, just from a practical point of view, when you first walk in there, I like to avoid people. I find that there's a lot of nervousness and tension in those rooms before you walk in, and people will do all kinds of different things with their nervousness, and sometimes they will try to distract you. Sometimes their nervousness comes out with talking about themselves, even just talking to you. Because sometimes they're thinking, well, you know what, if I keep talking to this guy, he's not going to be as prepared as me, and I already finished my audition. And so what I do is I go in, and you're going to sign in whenever you're ready. Hopefully you've gotten there nice and early, and then I just go off into a corner. Or I go, if it's going out into a hallway is okay, you're not disturbing anybody else, then I just really sit and concentrate, avoid that whole group. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to see it. I'm just focusing in on doing my preparation. And then, when they call me, then I just walk in there. And I guess the very last thing too is I don't try to kill the nervousness. I acknowledge it. I realize that as an actor, I want to be in touch with what I'm doing. And if I'm feeling nervousness, then I agree to it. And what I also find is that I want to make sure that I harness it. So that way it does bring some extra life to what I do. And most importantly, make sure nobody sees that nervousness.
All right.
So I'm not saying, I'm sorry, I was just going to say, okay. So I'm not saying kill it, feel it, but don't let people see it.
Yeah, I agree with particularly that last point, Aaron, about you don't want to be entirely free of nerves because you want this to matter. You want to have that energy. The other thing I want to end with, for me, as far as the mindset, is know that if you are at that audition, whether they called you in or it was an open call, you were there because they think that you're worth looking at, that you have a very real shot at this role. And so however nervous or self-conscious or worried you might feel about it, the only reason you're there in that room is because you are very credible as a choice for this piece. And then the other thing is that facing the casting director the director, the producer who's ever making the decision. There's this idea among actors that that's like some gauntlet you've got to face or some dragon that you've got to slay. But however rude or impatient or surly the casting director may be, know that he or she is looking at you saying, I hope you get this role. Because my job is to fill this role. And if you get it, then I'm done and I can go home. So whatever face or whatever vibe or whatever thing you think you might be getting, know that the people in that room very much want you to be the solution to their problem. They want you to get this job.
That's a great way to frame it. You could be the solution to the casting director's problem,
Right.
which is a great way to have a mindset and get in there. Well, John, thank you again.
Thank you.
I know Aaron and I are both grateful for you being our special guest today. This has been fantastic. We had tons of questions. I'm really excited we got all these different questions in. I think this has been extremely helpful. If you'd like to find out more information about John and his work, make sure you visit theauditionbook.com. Pick up a copy of his book there and master the audition process in your career by going through his materials and things. I would, Aaron, is there anything you want to close out before I kind of wrap us up for the day? Just kind of to finish up.
Well, I guess just basically, I just want to say congratulations to everybody who is here. You people are doing what most people just kind of dream about and talk about and fantasize about, and you are out here doing it. Just like John was saying, as an artist, we are given some abilities, but we also have to work very hard at really developing the skills. And this is what you're doing. You're starting this business, or you're already in this business, and you need to learn how the business works. And really, I just have so much admiration for what you guys are doing. You're being very proactive. You're getting the knowledge that you need to give yourself your best chance for success. So I just want to say congratulations.
Okay, great. If you would like to leave a comment on Facebook, we'd appreciate it. If you'd go over to facebook.com/howtomodel and leave some feedback about this session, be as specific as possible. Write down what you learned, maybe some of the things that were insights for you, some new things that were brought to light today during the session and the question and answer. And if you leave a comment there about this workshop specifically, we're going to go ahead and give you a free gift today. Aaron's has a free download that he'd like to have me send you. So if you make that comment over on our Facebook page, facebook.com/howtomodel, we're going to go ahead and give you a free gift today. So we'd really appreciate any feedback that you could provide. Also, the replay of this, we're recording this for posterity for you to listen to again and again as many times as you want. Not only the main session, but also this question and answer session. That will be posted, and you'll be emailed about that recording no later than Tuesday of next week. So watch for that in your inbox. Hopefully we can get it to you sooner. I'm going to do a little bit of editing, get that posted, and then you will get that replay link, the digital version of that online indefinitely, so you can just continue to watch it or review it, or there's certain parts that you would like to review. Also, for everyone that typed questions in today, I'm going to be forwarding those questions over to John and Aaron's emails so they can get those, and if there's any follow-up, you guys can also have that answered as well. Watch for a survey coming out, probably this week coming up, just to ask a little bit about how you thought about the session. That'll be coming in your inbox as well. And if you're interested, if you're really serious about your acting and modeling career, and you want to get started in a big way, Aaron actually offers private one-on-one coaching. Now, this isn't for everybody. This is for people that are actually very serious about their career, and they want to spend time with Aaron on Skype or on the phone going over the steps they need to do in a one-on-one session to get started. So if you're interested in private coaching, if you think you're ready to really take your career to the next level, send Aaron an email at aaron@howtomodel.com, AARON@howtomodel.com, and in the subject line just put private coaching. And Aaron can follow up with you, give you the rates for that, the time slots he has. Now, he only does this about 4 times a month. And if you're interested, make sure you get your email over to him as soon as possible, and he can follow up with you with the private coaching. I think this is a great benefit. I know some of the people who are even on this call today have been through Aaron's private coaching. It's been extremely beneficial for them. Also, if you'd like more information about howtomodel.com, about any of our guests we've had, about all the different products and services that How to Model offers, you can read tons of free articles. You can subscribe to the newsletter. All of that is available at howtomodel.com, howtomodel.com. Make sure you're on the list. Make sure you're at that site. There is amazing resources there, tons of information for your acting or commercial modeling career. and check out the other products and services based around this that we offer as well. So when you get a survey in your inbox, be sure to fill out exactly what you're looking to learn, because we basically take all of your input and we design workshops. Aaron designs workshops based on the things that you want to learn specifically. So the more information we know about what you want to know about, what you want to learn in your acting or commercial modeling career, the better we can prepare those workshops this fall. So make sure you've got that on your radar as well. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of the Audition Secrets Workshop, how to prepare, audition, and book the job. We had a great day today. Watch your inbox for more information. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we'll talk to everybody later. Thanks. Bye.